Hey there, tonight we're uncovering how the Pilgrims navigated the treacherous Mayflower Voyage. What you're about to discover is that surviving wasn't just about braving storms, but also about dodging cramped quarters and questionable food. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of a rickety dock in Plymouth, England, in the year 1620. The salty sea breeze is whipping your cloak around like it's auditioning for a Shakespearean play, and you're staring at the Mayflower, a ship that looks just about as seaworthy as a soggy loaf of bread. But let's not judge a book by its cover, or, in this case, a ship by its weather-beaten hull. After all, you and your band of fellow travelers are about to embark on one of history's most infamous voyages. Why? Because staying in England sounds just as appealing as a trip to the dentist with no anesthesia. So, who are you, really? A group of religious separatists who've been causing quite the stir back home. You've been labelled as troublemakers, nonconformists, and other colourful names by the Church of England. Your grand rebellion, wanting to practice your faith without the oversight of a king who thinks he's God's gift to the universe. The endless religious squabbles have left you with two choices: stay and face persecution, or sail away to a new land where hopefully no one cares what you do on Sunday mornings. Now, let's talk about the elephant, or rather the whale, in the room: money. The voyage you're about to undertake isn't cheap. Try a staggering one, £000. To put it in perspective, that's about the cost of a small fortune, or an exceptionally lavish feast that could have kept you well fed for years. The financial gymnastics to secure this sum are worthy of their own epic saga. You need backers, and not just any backers, but ones who are willing to throw their money into a venture with all the certainty of betting on a three-legged horse. In comes the Merchant Adventurers of London. Their name screams excitement, doesn't it? These guys are your financial lifeline, offering the funds you need in exchange for future profits from whatever you manage to set up in the New World. It's a classic case of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, though the whole thing seems more like you're agreeing to scratch theirs with a feather while they come at yours with a rake. But wait, why are these so-called adventurers willing to risk their pounds on you? A bunch of religious rebels with no proven colonial skills. Simple, the promise of profit. The New World is like the Wild West of investment opportunities. There's land to be claimed, resources to be exploited, and the tantalizing potential to make a killing or get killed, but let's not focus on that just yet. With the financial backing sort of tackled, you're standing here on the dock with your fellow pilgrims, a mixed bag of the hopeful, the pious, and the outright desperate. You're about to cram yourself into a ship that's roughly the size of a modern-day tennis court, along with 100 of your closest friends, livestock, and maybe a rat or two that fancies a transatlantic holiday. Cozy, right? Let's take a moment to appreciate the absurdity. You're willingly stepping into a claustrophobic wooden box to cross an ocean that has swallowed more than its fair share of travelers. All this for the chance to start anew where the only certainty is uncertainty itself. The romance of adventure meets the cold, hard slap of reality. But hey, at least you can't say your life lacks excitement. As you prepare to board, you might be wondering about the logistics. How long will this journey take? Well, in today's terms, it's like taking a flight from New York to London that gets delayed by, about 2 months. The Atlantic crossing isn't exactly a Sunday picnic. You'll be at the mercy of the weather, and trust me, the weather doesn't have a great track record of mercy. But here you are, driven by the hope of religious freedom, economic opportunity, or perhaps just the thrill of doing something so dramatically different from the mundane. You're about to etch your place in history, not because you're guaranteed success, but because you're willing to take the risk. And as the Mayflower's creaky gangplank welcomes you aboard, let's just say you're in for one heck of a ride. So, as you step onto the Mayflower's creaky gangplank, let's set the scene. Imagine squeezing into a space about the size of your average two-bedroom apartment, but instead of cozy couches and a reliable Wi-Fi connection, you've got 102 passengers, a handful of livestock, and the occasional rat scurrying around like it's on a mission. Welcome to your new home for the next 66 days, give or take a storm or two. Now, if you're picturing the Mayflower as some grand, impressive vessel, let me burst that bubble with the sharp pin of reality. At just about 100 feet long and 25 feet wide, this wooden tub is more overgrown fishing boat than luxury ocean liner. To put it in perspective, that's about the length of a basketball court and half the width. Space is about as abundant as breathable air on Mars, and privacy, forget it. You might as well hang a sign saying personal space, a thing of the past. The Mayflower was never meant to ferry human cargo across the Atlantic. Originally a cargo ship, its sturdy build was more suited to hauling barrels of wine than families with dreams of freedom. But here you are, transforming it into a floating hostel. You're crammed into the 'tween deck, a dim, damp space between the ship's main deck and the hold. It's the medieval equivalent of economy class, minus the complimentary peanuts and pretzels. Speaking of which, let's talk about the culinary delights that await you. Your menu consists of hardtack, dried peas, salted meat, and beer. Yes, beer, because water tended to turn into a microbial soup after a few days at sea. Hardtack, for the uninitiated, is what happens when bread and concrete have a baby. It's dry, tough, and only slightly more appetizing than chewing on your shoe. And as for the salted meat, well, let's just say it's aged to perfection, if your idea of perfection is something that could survive the apocalypse. But food isn't your only concern. There's also the small matter of hygiene, or the lack thereof. Bathing facilities, non-existent. If you're lucky, you might catch a wave to the face during a storm, but otherwise, relying on nature's deodorant, salt air, and the power of denial. The chamber parts are communal, and the smell, let's just call it historically authentic. Then there's the social dynamic to contend with. Picture a reality TV show where everyone's forced to live in a cramped space with no way to vote anyone off the island. With personalities ranging from pious pilgrims to pragmatic merchants, tensions run high. It's a melting pot of ambitions, beliefs, and grudges, all simmering in a stew of discomfort and seasickness. You've got the leaders like William Bradford, who's trying to keep everyone's spirits up, even as the ship pitches and rolls like a drunken sailor. Then there are the sailors themselves, hardened and foul-mouthed, watching this holy roller coaster with bemused skepticism. The voyage isn't just a physical journey, it's a psychological endurance test. As the days drag into weeks, the novelty of adventure wears thin, replaced by the monotony of endless waves and the constant creaking of the ship. You start to miss the solid ground more than you miss your mother's cooking. You dream of land, any land, where you can stretch your legs and breathe air that doesn't smell like a mixture of salt, sweat, and despair. And yet, amid the hardships, there's a strange camaraderie that develops. Maybe it's the shared misery or the mutual hope for a new beginning, but you find yourself forming bonds with people you'd probably cross the street to avoid back in England. You swap stories, share rationed meals, and even laugh together when the weather throws its worst at you. It's not always harmonious. Arguments flare up like wildfire, and there's enough finger-pointing to put a traffic cop to shame. But you learn to coexist, because what choice do you have? The social hierarchy aboard the Mayflower is as rigid as the ship's mast. The Pilgrims, with their religious fervor, are viewed with a mixture of awe and annoyance by the more secular passengers. The sailors, meanwhile, are a law unto themselves, their salty language and superstitions as much a part of the ship as the ropes and sails. But when a storm hits, hierarchy becomes irrelevant. It's all hands on deck, literally, as everyone pitches in to secure the ship and keep it from becoming the Atlantic's latest shipwreck. And the storms, oh, the storms, they are the kind that make you question your life choices and start bargaining with a higher power, promising to never complain about the weather back home again. The waves tower above like watery mountains. The wind howls as if auditioning for a horror movie, and the ship lurches with a violence that turns your stomach into a washing machine. You cling to whatever you can find, praying that the Mayflower holds together. Yet, through it all, there's a resilient spirit that refuses to be quenched. You remind yourself why you're here, why you left behind everything familiar for a chance to start anew. The promise of religious freedom, the hope of prosperity, the lure of adventure, they all blend into a potent cocktail that keeps you going, even when it feels like you're trapped in a never-ending nightmare. As the days turn into weeks and the weeks into months, the Mayflower becomes more than just a ship. It's a crucible, forging a group of disparate individuals into a community bound by a shared dream. It's not always pretty, and it's certainly not comfortable, but it's real. And as you look around at your fellow passengers, you realize that you're part of something bigger than yourself. A journey that's as much about the people you're with as the destination you're striving for. So here you are, somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, on a ship that's seen better days, with a group of people who are as flawed and hopeful as you are. It's not the grand adventure you might have envisioned, but it's an adventure nonetheless. And with every creak of the timber and every gust of wind, you're getting closer to the new world and the new life that awaits. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The saga's just warming up. So there you are, barbing on the open sea, the Mayflower, your reluctant chariot. After 66 grueling days, you spot land, a sight as miraculous as a unicorn in a parking lot. Land ho! Echoes through the ship, a cry filled with relief and anticipation. You've made it to the new world. Well, sort of. Because instead of the intended destination of the Virginia colony, you're staring at the blustery shores of Cape Cod. Oops. And why Cape Cod? A charming mix of bad weather, navigational hiccups, and perhaps a little sabotage on the part of the crew. See, the crew had a hankering for heading north, where they could hightail it back to England before the Atlantic turned into a frigid hellscape. So here you are, at the wrong address, with winter knocking like an unwelcome guest. Now, you might picture the Pilgrims stepping ashore with grace, but reality was more slapstick than dignified. The November chill bites harder than an angry dog, and the unfamiliar terrain is all sand dunes and scrubby trees. No welcoming committees, no red carpet, just you, the elements, and a growing realization that this new world is as unforgiving as a bad-tempered boss on a Monday morning. Let's talk about the Mayflower Compact, a document that's as famous as it is misunderstood. Often hailed as the first step toward democracy, it was less about noble ideals and more about preventing the group from descending into chaos. You see, not everyone aboard was a pilgrim. Some were strangers, folks more interested in profit than piety, and tensions were simmering harder than a kettle on a campfire. The compact was a quick and dirty solution to keep everyone from going Lord of the Flies on each other. It basically said, let's agree to work together and not backstab each other, at least until we get this colony thing figured out. The compact was signed by 41 men. Women and children, despite also being cramped in that floating sardine can, didn't get a say. Equality, not so much. But in a world where European monarchs ruled with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, this was a step towards self-governance. Small steps, folks, small steps. With the paperwork out of the way, you turn your attention to survival, which is about as easy as making a souffle in a microwave. Winter in New England is no joke. You thought the English weather was dreary. Welcome to the Northeast, where the cold feels like it has a personal vendetta against you. Supplies dwindle faster than your confidence on a first date, and there's no corner store to restock your hardtack and salted meat. The situation is dire, and the clock's ticking. It's not just the cold that bites, it's the hunger. Disease and malnutrition start picking off passengers like a grim reaper with a to-do list. Out of the original 102 souls, only about half will make it through the winter. That's right, folks. Those odds are less favorable than a coin flip. And yet, you push on, driven by a stubborn will to survive, and the hope that spring will bring warmer days and better fortune. But let's debunk another myth while we're at it. The idea that the Pilgrims were the first Europeans to stumble upon these shores. Long before your arrival, explorers and fishermen had already been making pit stops along the coast. The local Native American tribes, including the Wampanoag, had seen it all before. To them, you're just the latest in a line of pale-faced intruders with questionable hygiene and even more questionable intentions. Speaking of the locals, they're not exactly rolling out the welcome mat. Can you blame them? Previous encounters with Europeans had been less than friendly, and here comes another batch, looking like they've been dragged through a hedge backwards. But necessity is the mother of strange alliances, and eventually the Wampanoag, led by Chief Massasoit, will lend a hand. But that's a tale for another time. For now, you focus on survival. Building shelters in the freezing cold is like trying to construct a Lego set with numb fingers and a blindfold. The trees are stubbornly rooted, and your tools are about as efficient as a butter knife in a sword fight. Yet slowly, surely, a small settlement takes shape. Plymouth Plantation is born, though calling it a plantation is like calling a muddy puddle an Olympic swimming pool. Through it all, the dream persists. The dream of a place where you can worship freely, where your children can grow without the oppressive hand of a monarch dictating their every move. It's a dream that propels you forward, even as the odds seem stacked against you. As the winter drags on, you find warmth not just from the meager fires, but from each other. The bonds formed on that treacherous journey across the ocean solidify, and a community begins to emerge. It's a community forged in hardship, resilience, and a shared vision of a better future. So here you are, on the shores of a new world, with nothing but determination and a dash of desperation to see you through. The Mayflower may have been your vessel, but it's the spirit of perseverance that will be your compass. And as the harsh winter slowly begins to release its grip, you cling to the hope that spring will bring renewal and the promise of a new beginning. Stay tuned, because the story of survival, struggle, and the shaping of a new society is far from over. The Pilgrims' journey is just beginning, and the chapters yet to be written will leave an indelible mark on history. And so the saga unfolds, with you knee-deep in a landscape that looks like winter itself decided to crash land, bringing along its frosty entourage for good measure. The New England chill is relentless, whipping through your makeshift shelters with all the subtlety of a drill sergeant on a caffeine high. But hey, you didn't sign up for a tropical vacation. You're here to forge a new life, and if that means wrestling with Mother Nature as she bares her icy fangs, then so be it. Now, brace yourself for the grim reality check. By the end of this bitter winter, your numbers will have dwindled faster than a New Year's resolution. Out of the original 102 souls, around 50 will see the spring sunshine. That's right, like a party that's gone horribly wrong. Half of you won't make it to see the dessert course. Disease, starvation, and the cold are proving to be formidable foes, picking off your companions with a ruthless efficiency that would make even the grim Reaper nod in approval. It's not just any illness that's decimating your ranks. Think scurvy, pneumonia, and tuberculosis, the kind of ailments that treat your immune system like a chew toy. Why? Because your diet of hardtack and salted meat lacks the essential vitamins to keep you fighting fit. And let's not even get started on the water situation. When the beer runs low, and it does, you're left with water that's about as fresh as a politician's promises. In this crucible of despair, you now have to navigate the tricky terrain of relationships with the indigenous Wampanoag people. Enter Squanto, your unexpected ally in this harsh new world. But let's not romanticize this as some Disney-esque friendship, because it's anything but. Squanto, or Tisquantum if you're feeling formal, is a member of the Patuxet tribe, and his life story reads like a tragic epic. Kidnapped by English explorers, sold into slavery in Spain, and eventually making his way back to his homeland only to find his tribe decimated by disease, Squanto isn't just a friendly local. He's a survivor, just like you. So, why would Squanto help a group of bedraggled foreigners who have stumbled into his backyard? Simple. Survival. You see, the Wampanoag, led by Chief Massasoit, are dealing with their own set of challenges, including rival tribes who'd love nothing more than to see them wiped off the map. Teaming up with you isn't about charity. It's a strategic alliance. Squanto becomes your translator, your guide, and your agricultural consultant all rolled into one. He's the guy who shows you how to plant corn in this unforgiving soil, using fish as fertilizer, a method that sounds bizarre but works wonders. But before you can get your green thumbs going, you've got to build something resembling a community. The first attempts at constructing a settlement are nothing short of a construction nightmare. Imagine trying to build a house while your hands are frozen and your tools are about as effective as plastic cutlery on a stake. You hack away at the stubborn trees, fashioning rudimentary homes that lean more towards rustic than architectural marvel. Yet, with each log laid and each roof patched, Plymouth Plantation begins to emerge from the wilderness, a testament to human tenacity in the face of overwhelming odds. And speaking of odds, let's talk about your farming prospects. The soil here isn't exactly the Garden of Eden. It's more like the Garden of Whedon, with rocks and roots conspiring to turn your fields into a farmer's worst nightmare. But you adapt, because that's what you do when the only other option is failure. Thanks to Squanto's fishing tips and some creative land management, you're able to coax a few green shoots from the barren ground, a small but crucial victory in your fight for survival. As you labor, the social dynamics continue to play out like a reality show with no option to change the channel. Pilgrims' religious fervor remains a source of both inspiration and irritation, while the so-called strangers are more focused on practical matters, like not starving to death. It's a balancing act that requires all your diplomatic skills to keep the peace, and even then, tensions occasionally bubble over like a pot left on the stove too long. Yet, despite the odds, you hold on to the dream that brought you here, a dream of a society where you can worship freely and perhaps, just perhaps, carve out a life better than the one you left behind. This dream is your fuel, your driving force, and as the harsh winter slowly loosens its grip, you cling to the hope that the worst is behind you. But history, as you know, is never that simple. The challenges continue, and while you've managed to take a few shaky steps forward, the path ahead remains fraught with uncertainty. The relationship with the Wampanoag is tentative at best. The looming specter of famine and disease never truly fades. Yet, as you stand on the threshold of spring, with the promise of new life on the horizon, you're reminded that sometimes survival itself is the greatest triumph of all. The Pilgrim's journey is far from over, and as you prepare to face whatever comes next, one thing is certain. You're not just surviving, you're adapting, learning, and slowly but surely building the foundation for what will one day become a new chapter in history. So, keep those spirits up and stay tuned, because the story of the Pilgrims is just getting started, and the pages yet to be written are filled with trials, triumphs, and the indomitable will to endure. As the promise of spring unfolds in front of you, transforming the harsh landscape into a more forgiving patchwork of greens and browns, you find yourself on the cusp of a moment that history books would later inflate to epic proportions. The first Thanksgiving. But before you start picturing cornucopias overflowing with abundance, let's hit pause and do some reality checking. This wasn't a feast that would put a Michelin-starred restaurant to shame. It was more of a modest potluck among survivalists, grateful for the mere fact that they hadn't become footnotes in the annals of failed colonies. The year is 1621, and your first harvest is in, barely enough to stave off starvation, but a triumph nonetheless. And here's where we get to the heart of the Thanksgiving myth. Forget the image of pilgrims in buckled hats sitting down to a turkey dinner with all the fixings. Turkey might have been on the menu, but so were venison, corn, and squash. Think of it as a culinary mashup of what was available, rather than a carefully curated feast. The Pilgrims and about 90 members of the Wampanoag tribe, including Massasoit, gathered for a 3-day celebration. Yes, 3 days. In today's terms, that's like turning a Thanksgiving dinner into a long weekend festival. And why not? After a year of unimaginable hardship, you'd want to celebrate survival like you just won the world's toughest marathon. Now, let's address the elephant, or should I say turkey, in the room. This celebration wasn't called Thanksgiving by the Pilgrims themselves. That label would come much later, attached to the event by a nation eager for a founding myth that could be served up with a side of cranberry sauce. The reality: this was about gratitude, sure, but also about diplomacy. The Wampanoag's presence wasn't just neighborly goodwill. It was a strategic alliance, a tentative peace offering in a world where alliances could mean the difference between life and death. Fast forward a couple of centuries, and this modest gathering morphs into the Thanksgiving we know today, laden with traditions that would have the original participants scratching their heads. Football games, parade balloons, not exactly what they envisioned, but myths have a way of growing, don't they? Especially when they serve a purpose. In this case, the purpose was to forge a unifying American identity, a narrative that spoke to resilience, cooperation, and the triumph of the human spirit, a narrative that conveniently glossed over the complex and often brutal realities of colonial expansion and the inevitable clash of cultures. So, what of the Pilgrims' legacy? Is it all just smoke and mirrors, a romantic tale spun from threads of hardship and hope? Not quite. Their journey, for all its mythologizing, did set the stage for something bigger than themselves. The Mayflower Compact, that hastily scribbled agreement, laid early groundwork for self-governance and democratic principles, a precursor to the systems that would eventually define a nation. And while their interactions with the Native Americans were fraught with tension and tragedy, they also illustrate the complicated dance of cooperation and conflict that defined early colonial history. Yet, it's crucial to remember that the Pilgrims' story is just one piece of a sprawling mosaic. Their settlement at Plymouth wasn't the genesis of America, but a chapter in a much larger narrative. Other European powers had already dipped their toes in the New World long before the Mayflower set sail, and indigenous cultures had thrived here for thousands of years. The Pilgrims' arrival was less a discovery and more an intersection of histories, each with its own set of challenges and triumphs. Reflecting on their legacy, it's tempting to get lost in the romance of it all, the daring voyage, the struggle for survival, the birth of a new society. But to truly honor their story, we must embrace the complexity and contradictions. Acknowledge their courage, yes, but also recognize the impact their arrival had on the people and land they encountered. It's a story of resilience and reinvention, of forging new paths while navigating the shadows of the past. The Pilgrims, with their dreams and determination, left an indelible mark on American history. Their journey is a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure and adapt, to carve out a future even when the odds are stacked higher than a pile of unwashed dishes after Thanksgiving dinner. So, as you wrap up this chapter in the Pilgrim's saga, remember that history is never just black and white. It's a tapestry woven with threads of truth and myth, shaped by those who dare to dream and those who dare to question. As you tuck these insights away, ready to impress, or perhaps annoy, your friends and family with your newfound knowledge, take a moment to appreciate the richness of history. It's messy, it's complicated, and it's far from the sanitized stories we sometimes hear. But that's what makes it worth exploring. The Pilgrim's Tale is a reminder that even in the face of adversity, there's always room for new beginnings, for celebration in the midst of struggle, and for stories that continue to shape the world around us. So go ahead, dig into that turkey leg and give thanks, not just for what was, but for the ongoing journey of discovery and understanding. In the 5th century BCE, Athens was strutting around the ancient world like the prom king at a high school dance, except this dance floor was packed with philosophers, playwrights, and politicians instead of awkward teenagers. This was the Greek Golden Age, a time when Athens was the epicenter of innovation and culture, a kind of ancient Silicon Valley with togas instead of hoodies. But before we get too carried away with the romanticism, let's take a closer look at what was really going on under those marble columns. First off, let's address the elephant in the room, democracy. Athens is often hailed as the birthplace of democracy, but before we start handing out participation trophies, let's clarify what that actually meant. Sure, democracy in Athens was revolutionary, but if you're picturing it as a kind of ancient version of a town hall where everyone had a say, think again. In reality, this everyone didn't include women, slaves, or even men who weren't citizens. So, we're talking about a very exclusive club of about 30, 000 to 50, 000 citizens out of a population of 250, 000. That's right, only around 10-20% of the population got to play the democracy game. Now, onto the intellectual heavyweights of the time. Socrates and Plato were the intellectual influencers of their day, minus the Instagram accounts. Socrates, the original gadfly, was known for his relentless questioning, like a relentless podcast host who just won't let his guests off the hook. He didn't write anything down himself, much like that friend who insists they could write a book but never gets past the first page. Instead, his ideas lived on through his star pupil, Plato, who did the heavy lifting by actually putting pen to papyrus. But what about the economic engine powering this cultural boom? Athens was raking in the drachmas thanks to its strong navy and strategic control over trade routes. The Delian League, initially formed as a defensive alliance against the Persians, quickly turned into Athens' personal piggy bank. Member states paid tribute, and let's just say those funds didn't all go towards noble causes. Some of that money helped build the Parthenon, a symbol of Athenian glory, which, by the way, cost approximately 469 silver talents, or roughly $7 million in today's money. That's a lot of cash for a fancy building, but at least it had good reviews. Now, you might be wondering, how did this flurry of creativity and wealth translate into cultural output? Well, playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides were churning out dramas faster than Netflix releases new series. These plays weren't just for entertainment. They were a chance to explore big ideas like fate, hubris, and the whims of the gods. Think of it as ancient binge-watching, except with a lot more existential dread, and fewer dragons. Meanwhile, the sculptors were busy chiseling away, creating lifelike statues that made everyone else look like they were crafted from Play-Doh. Phidias, the superstar sculptor, was the man behind the statue of Zeus at Olympia, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Standing at about 40 feet tall, this massive statue was a testament to both artistic skill and the Athenian flair for the dramatic. But wait, there's more. Athens was also a hotspot for scientific and mathematical breakthroughs. Enter Hippocrates, the guy who gave us the Hippocratic Oath, the promise every doctor makes to do no harm. His approach to medicine was groundbreaking because he suggested that diseases weren't punishments from angry gods, but had natural causes. Shocking, right? It's like he was the original mythbuster, debunking the notion that headaches were caused by an unhappy Zeus. However, let's not get too carried away with the idea that Athens was all sunshine and philosophical lollipops. The city-state's wealth and power were built on the backs of slaves and fueled by imperialistic ambitions. The Peloponnesian War, which kicked off in 431 BCE, was essentially a drawn-out spat between Athens and Sparta that lasted nearly 30 years. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for Athens. The war drained resources, weakened the economy, and ultimately led to the city's downfall. So, while the Greek Golden Age was indeed a time of incredible cultural achievement and intellectual curiosity, it was also a period marked by inequality, conflict, and political maneuvering. The reality was more complex than the glowing legends suggest, a reminder that even the most storied eras have their shadows. In the end, the legacy of the Greek Golden Age is a mix of brilliance and blemish, much like every other period in history. But one thing's for sure. Athens left an indelible mark on the world, proving that even in ancient times, a city with big ideas and a bit of swagger could change the course of history. So, while Athens left an indelible mark on the world, proving that even in ancient times, a city with big ideas and a bit of swagger could change the course of history, we can't ignore the fact that this cultural juggernaut also came with a serious case of marble fever. And to the Parthenon, the ancient equivalent of a billionaire's vanity project, except instead of a superyacht, it was a temple with columns so impressive they practically begged to be Instagrammed. Had Instagram been a thing, of course. The Parthenon was not just a pretty facade. It was a complex symbol of Athenian power, religious devotion, and artistic genius all rolled into one. Think of it as the ultimate flex in marble, standing proudly atop the Acropolis, announcing to the world, "Look at us, we're Athens, and we're kind of a big deal." Designed by the architects Ictinos and Callicrates, and supervised by our old friend Phidias, this architectural wonder was built in less than a decade, from 447 to 438 BCE, a timeline that would make even the most efficient modern project manager break into a cold sweat. But let's talk numbers, because after all, nothing says, "I'm serious about my temple," like a price tag. The Parthenon cost about 469 silver talents, which we've already established is roughly $7 million today. That's a lot of talent for a temple, even by ancient standards. To put it in perspective, that was enough silver to pay the annual wages for tens of thousands of Athenian rowers in the navy. The Parthenon wasn't just built with drachmas and dreams. It was a product of both Athenian wealth and the labor of thousands, including skilled artisans and, yes, slaves. Here's a reality check. While we marvel at the Parthenon's beauty, the construction process involved less than glamorous elements. The marble was quarried from Mount Pentelicus, about 16 kilometers away, and transported to the Acropolis by sheer human willpower and some seriously overworked oxen. This was no small feat, and involved a labor force that included both paid workers and slaves toiling under the hot Greek sun. So, while the Parthenon stood as a beacon of democracy and culture, the reality was that its splendid columns were built on the backs of those who didn't have a say in the democratic process. And let's not forget the artistic achievements that adorned this masterpiece. The Parthenon housed a massive statue of Athena, crafted by Phidias himself, standing about 38 feet tall and covered in gold and ivory. This wasn't just any statue. It was Athena Parthenos, the virgin goddess, symbolizing wisdom and war, decked out in precious materials that would make even the most bling-loving rapper jealous. But here's where the myth-busting comes in. While Athena's statue was a symbol of Athenian pride, it was also a not-so-subtle reminder of the power and wealth concentrated in the hands of a few. Now, as much as we love a good temple story, not everything in Athens was about grandiosity and marble. When Athenians weren't busy building architectural wonders or waging wars, they were deeply engrossed in their civic duties, and quite often in their theater outings. Yes, the theater was the Netflix of ancient Athens, minus the endless scrolling. Athenians were passionate about their dramas, and playwrights like Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus were the blockbuster directors of their day. Theater in Athens was more than just entertainment. It was a civic duty and a form of public discourse. Every year during the city Dionysia, a festival in honor of Dionysus, the god of wine and theater, Athenians flocked to the open-air theater on the Acropolis to watch plays that explored themes like morality, fate, and the whims of the gods. It was a chance to reflect on the human condition, to witness the tragic flaws of characters like Oedipus and Medea, and perhaps to feel a little better about their own lives in comparison. But here's the kicker. Attending the theater wasn't just for the elite. Thanks to a little thing called the Theoric Fund, even the poorest citizens could afford to see a play. The state subsidized the cost of theater tickets, making the drama accessible to all free male citizens. It's like Athens' version of free popcorn at the movies, ensuring that everyone could partake in the communal experience of watching a tragic hero's life unravel on stage. And so, the daily life of an Athenian was a balancing act of civic obligations, philosophical musings, and a healthy dose of theater. While they weren't exactly binge-watching the latest season of Tragedy Island, they were deeply engaged in a cultural life that celebrated both the mind and the senses. However, let's not romanticize this too much. The reality was that, while Athenian citizens enjoyed their cultural pursuits and civic duties, a significant portion of the population, women, slaves, and non-citizens, remained on the sidelines, excluded from the democratic and cultural privileges of the polis. In the shadows of the Parthenon's grandeur and the theater's emotional highs, everyday life in Athens was a tapestry woven with both the splendor and the struggle of its people. Athens was a city of contrast, where lofty ideals coexisted with harsh realities, and where the pursuit of excellence was often paired with the exploitation of the many for the benefit of the few. As we continue to unravel the layers of the Greek Golden Age, we see that the legacy of this remarkable period is one of both awe-inspiring achievements and sobering truths. It's a reminder that while history often elevates the ideals of an era, the reality is always more nuanced, more complex, and more human than the legends suggest. So, stay tuned as we dive deeper into the next chapter of this fascinating saga, exploring how the echoes of Athens' Golden Age continue to reverberate through the annals of history. As we wade deeper into this sea of ancient brilliance, the spotlight shifts to the intellectual giants whose ideas still echo through the lecture halls and coffee shops of today. Enter Aristotle and Herodotus, the rock star sages of the classical world. Imagine them as the original TED speakers, captivating audiences not with PowerPoint slides, but with scrolls of wisdom that, frankly, put the art of war to shame. Let's start with Aristotle, the man who wore more philosophical hats than a hipster at a beanie sale. This dude was a polymath before it was cool, dabbling in everything from biology to ethics. If the term Renaissance man hadn't been coined centuries later, Aristotle would have been its poster child. Born in 384 BCE in Stagira, not too far from a modern-day Greek vacation hotspot, Aristotle was a student of Plato and later became the tutor of Alexander the Great. Talk about an impressive LinkedIn profile. But Aristotle wasn't just about grooming future conquerors. He was busy laying down the groundwork for Western philosophy and science. Now, let's get one thing straight. Aristotle's theories weren't always spot on. His idea of spontaneous generation, the belief that life could spring from non-living matter, turned out to be more of a philosophical fan fiction than scientific fact. But hey, even Homer nods right. Despite the occasional misstep, his work on logic and empirical observation laid the foundation for the scientific method. His influence is so pervasive that even today, when you argue with a friend using logical reasoning, you're essentially channeling your inner Aristotle. Meanwhile, we have Herodotus, the so-called father of history, who wrote the book on historical inquiry, literally. His work, Histories, was a 9-volume epic that combined fact and folklore in a way that would make modern historians twitch. Herodotus was the kind of guy who never let the truth get in the way of a good story. He'd probably fit right in at a modern-day bar, regaling patrons with tales of giant ants that mined gold, or the time he heard about a battle over a woman's beauty. While critics accuse Herodotus of embellishment, his attempts at documenting the Greco-Persian Wars were groundbreaking. He was among the first to attempt a systematic collection and analysis of events, trying to understand the cause and effect relationships of history, kind of like the world's first cause and effect diagram, without the fancy software. Despite his penchant for the dramatic, Herodotus' work laid the groundwork for the field of history, reminding us that storytelling and facts aren't always mutually exclusive. But let's not get swept away by the high tide of intellectual achievement without acknowledging the low tide of societal inequality. While these philosophical heavyweights were busy shaping the future, it's crucial to remember that education in Athens wasn't the democratic institution we might imagine. It was more of an exclusive club, and if you weren't a free male citizen, your chances of attending a toga-clad TED talk were about as slim as finding a vegan option at a Spartan banquet. Women, slaves, and non-citizens were largely locked out of these intellectual circles, left to watch from the sidelines as the men of Athens philosophized about ethics and politics. Education in ancient Athens was a privilege, not a right, and literacy was no exception. Estimates suggest that only about 10% of the population was literate, a figure that makes modern education stats look like a utopia. This exclusivity meant that while Aristotle and Herodotus were busy expanding minds, a significant chunk of the population was left to wonder what all the fuss was about. Imagine missing out on the latest episode of Philosophy Hour because you were too busy with more pressing concerns, like ensuring the household had enough olive oil for the week. Yet, despite these societal limitations, the intellectual explosion of the era was nothing short of a seismic event in human history. The ideas of Aristotle, Herodotus, and their contemporaries reverberated through the ages, influencing everything from the Enlightenment to modern-day political theory. Without them, we might still be attributing thunderstorms to Zeus' bad mood rather than atmospheric pressure changes. But here's the kicker. While Athens' intellectual legacy is rightly celebrated, it's also a poignant reminder of the selective nature of progress. The Greek Golden Age wasn't so golden for everyone, with its promises of enlightenment and reason falling short for many. The irony is that a society renowned for its philosophical pursuits often ignored the very human rights it philosophized about, leaving us with a legacy that's both inspiring and sobering. So, as we continue our journey through this remarkable period, let's keep our eyes peeled for the nuances and contradictions that define the Greek Golden Age. It's a story of brilliance and blindness, where the light of knowledge coexisted with the shadows of exclusion. As we peel back the layers, we'll uncover more of the gritty truths hiding beneath the polished marble exterior, revealing a world that, despite its flaws, dared to dream big and think even bigger. And speaking of big thinkers, stay tuned as we explore how these ancient ideas paved the way for modern science, politics, and culture. Because if there's one thing we can learn from Aristotle and Herodotus, it's that history isn't just a series of events. It's a tapestry of ideas, woven together by the hands of those brave enough to question the status quo. As we delve deeper into the political soap opera that was ancient Greece, we find ourselves amidst the tangled webs of intrigue and warfare, a saga that puts even the most dramatic reality TV to shame. Welcome to the Peloponnesian War, a conflict that had more twists and turns than a roller coaster designed by a philosopher. Think less Game of Thrones, and more the Real Housewives of ancient Greece, where alliances were as fragile as Athenian pottery and betrayals were served harder than a Spartan spear. Now, let's set the stage. The Peloponnesian War kicked off in 431 BCE, featuring Athens and Sparta, the frenemies of the ancient world. Picture Athens as the charismatic, culture-loving prom king, and Sparta as the no-nonsense jock who'd rather flex their military muscles than engage in philosophical debates. The war, which dragged on for 27 years, was essentially a drawn-out grudge match over power, resources, and let's be honest, a healthy dose of ego. To understand this epic showdown, let's break down the alliances. On one side, you had the Delian League, led by Athens, a coalition of city-states that might have sounded like a democratic club, but was more of an Athenian empire dressed in democracy's clothing. On the other side stood the Peloponnesian League, helmed by Sparta, a coalition of city-states that valued discipline over democracy and were more united by their mutual suspicion of Athens than any shared love for Spartan austerity. The war was sparked by a series of strategic blunders and political bluster. Athens, ever the overconfident prom king, decided it would be a swell idea to meddle in the affairs of Corinth, a Spartan ally, by backing Corcyra, Corinth's rebellious colony. This move was about as subtle as a toga at a black-tie event, and about as well received as a tax hike. The situation escalated faster than you can say Euripides, leading to Sparta declaring war on Athens. Fun fact, this declaration was akin to a formal invitation to a 27-year-long brawl. The Peloponnesian War wasn't just a series of battles. It was a complex dance of diplomacy, intrigue, and good old-fashioned backstabbing. Athens, with its formidable navy, played the sea like a chessboard, cutting off supply lines and harassing enemy ports. Sparta, on the other hand, excelled in land warfare, with its hoplites, heavily armed soldiers, striking fear into the hearts of their enemies. The Spartan troops were like the ancient world's version of a highly disciplined SWAT team, minus the modern gear, but with all the intensity. But let's not get too carried away with the romantic notion of noble warriors and wise leaders. The truth is, both Athens and Sparta were prone to their share of strategic blunders. Take, for instance, the Sicilian expedition in 415 BCE, a classic case of Athenian overreach. Athens, in its infinite wisdom or lack thereof, decided to launch a massive military campaign against Sicily, hoping to expand its influence. Spoiler, it ended in disaster, with the Athenian fleet decimated and thousands of soldiers captured or killed. Think of it as history's way of reminding us that even the mightiest can fall victim to hubris. Meanwhile, war took a toll on the civilian population, with the plague hitting Athens in 430 BCE. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill cold. It was a devastating epidemic that wiped out about a third of the city's population, including the great statesman Pericles. The plague was a grim reminder that while humans waged war, nature had its own battles to fight, often with more deadly results. The conflict also saw its fair share of defections and betrayals. Alcibiades, the Athenian general and poster child for political opportunism, switched sides more times than a reality TV contestant swaps alliances. Initially, he championed the Sicilian expedition. Then, when the tide turned, he defected to Sparta, only to later cozy up with the Persians. If there were ever an award for best actor in a historical drama, Alcibiades would have been a shoo-in. As the war dragged on, both sides found themselves increasingly reliant on Persian gold to fund their campaigns. Yes, you heard that right. The Persians, Greece's old nemesis, were now the financial backers of both Athens and Sparta. It's a bit like borrowing money from your archenemy to continue fighting your best frenemy. Talk about a tangled web of alliances. By 404 BCE, the curtain fell on this epic drama with Athens' defeat and the destruction of its walls, marking the end of its golden age. Sparta emerged victorious, but found itself ill-equipped to handle the responsibilities of empire. The Peloponnesian War left a fractured Greece, paving the way for future conquests by outsiders like Philip of Macedon and his more famous son, Alexander the Great. But before we wrap up with a neat bow, let's debunk some myths. Peloponnesian War wasn't fought by noble warriors, guided by wise leaders, for the glory of their city-states. It was a brutal, drawn-out conflict, driven by power, greed, and the all-too-human tendency to overestimate one's capabilities. The war reminds us that history is often written by the victors, who conveniently gloss over the blunders and betrayals that propelled them to victory. So, as we sift through the rubble of Athens' fallen walls and Sparta's fleeting triumph, let's remember that the past is never as simple as it seems. Behind the marble facades and epic tales lies a complex tapestry of human ambition, folly, and resilience. As we prepare to dive into the next chapter of this saga, one thing is clear. Power struggles may evolve, but the human penchant for drama remains timeless. Stay tuned as we explore how this chaotic chapter set the stage for the rise of new powers and the enduring legacy of the Greek Golden Age. As the dust settled over the fallen walls of Athens and Sparta nursed its Harlow victory, the world witnessed the end of an era that had been as dazzling as it was turbulent. The Greek Golden Age might have been a fleeting blip on the historical radar, but its ripples have echoed through time, captivating us with a mix of intellectual brilliance and chaotic drama. Why does this short-lived oasis of creativity, nestled within the broader sweep of ancient history, still hold us in thrall? Perhaps it's because the Golden Age of Greece is like history's greatest soap opera, a cultural blockbuster complete with philosophical heavyweights, theatrical flair, and enough political intrigue to give any modern thriller a run for its money. Let's start with democracy, the political gift that Athens bequeathed to the world. Sure, the Athenian brand of democracy was more exclusive than a members-only club, but it set the stage for the democratic ideals we cherish today. The concept that ordinary citizens could have a say in their governance was revolutionary, even if ordinary meant a very specific subset of the population. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and we're still grappling with the same questions about representation and equality, albeit with slightly better fashion choices and less reliance on chiseled marble. The cultural legacy of the Greek Golden Age goes beyond politics and into the realm of high art and intellectual pursuit. The Parthenon, a symbol of Athenian glory, is more than just an architectural wonder. It's a testament to the human drive to create beauty amidst chaos. With its harmonious proportions and intricate sculptures, the Parthenon has inspired countless generations of architects, from the neoclassical designs that adorn capitals around the world to your local bank that decided columns were a good idea. It's like the ancient world's version of going viral, setting trends that last longer than any TikTok dance. But let's not forget the intellectual heavyweights who turned Athens into the brainy epicenter of the ancient world. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the original squad goals, paved the way for Western philosophy. Their ideas about ethics, politics, and the nature of reality laid the groundwork for centuries of thought. If you've ever engaged in a late-night debate about the meaning of life, or pondered the existence of a higher power over your morning coffee, you're channeling these ancient thinkers. Their legacy is a reminder that while fashions change and empires crumble, the quest for knowledge is eternal. Now, the Greek Golden Age wasn't all about lofty ideals and artistic triumphs. It had its fair share of flaws, from the exploitation of slaves to the exclusion of women from public life. It's easy to romanticize this period as a utopia of wisdom and beauty, but the reality was more complex. The same city that produced timeless art and philosophy was also a hotbed of inequality and imperial ambition. Athens' downfall, hastened by the Peloponnesian War, serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of overreach and hubris, a lesson that's as relevant today as it was 400 years ago. So, as we ponder the lasting impact of the Greek Golden Age, we find ourselves asking, have we really learned from history, or are we just repeating old patterns with shinier gadgets? In many ways, we're still grappling with the same issues of power, inequality, and the human desire to leave a mark on the world. The tools may have changed. Our philosophers now tweet, and our architects use CAD software instead of chisels. But the underlying challenges remain. In the end, the Greek Golden Age captivates us not just because of its achievements, but because it mirrors our own struggles and aspirations. It's a story of ambition and creativity, of human triumphs and failures, wrapped in a toga of timeless relevance. As we continue to build our own legacies, perhaps the most enduring lesson from this ancient era is the importance of balance, between ambition and humility, between innovation and tradition, and between the pursuit of greatness and the need for empathy. As the curtain falls on this ancient drama, we're left with a sense of awe at the brilliance that once was, and a sobering reminder of the shadows that accompanied it. The Greek Golden Age was a fleeting moment of light in a tumultuous world, yet its legacy continues to illuminate our path. So here's to Athens, the city that dared to dream big, to question everything, and to leave an indelible mark on history. Its story may be ancient, but its lessons are timeless, echoing in the corridors of power, the halls of academia, and the hearts of those who dare to imagine a better world. In the year 747, a little bundle of potential world domination named Charlemagne, or Charles the Great if you prefer titles that sound like an overachiever's epithet, was born into a family where the terms peaceful and tranquil were as foreign as a smartphone. His early days weren't filled with the typical childhood escapades. Instead, they were wrapped in the tapestry of Merovingian politics, a tapestry so intricate it was more like a medieval soap opera without the commercial breaks. Charlemagne's dad, Pepin the Short, who, despite his name, was big on ambition, was busy redefining what it meant to be a king in 8th century Europe. Forget the image of a benevolent ruler. Pepin was more like the CEO of a medieval corporation, constantly scheming to consolidate power. In 751, Pepin decided to upgrade his status from mayor of the palace to king of the Franks, a move that involved some serious political maneuvering and a not-so-subtle nudge from Pope Zachary. Apparently, when in doubt, getting the Pope's blessing was the medieval equivalent of a rebranding campaign. Now, Charlemagne wasn't exactly frolicking through meadows during these formative years. His education was a crash course in power dynamics, lessons that included everything from how to handle Saxon neighbors to advanced intrigue, your brother, your competitor. The family gatherings must have been a real hoot, filled with discussions on the best ways to outmaneuver rival factions rather than swapping bread recipes. Fast forward to 768, and we find Charlemagne stepping into the limelight alongside his brother Charlemagne. This was not your average sibling rivalry over who got the bigger slice of cake. This was a full-blown medieval drama. When their father Pepin kicked the bucket, the Frankish kingdom was split between the two brothers. Picture it as a high-stakes game of Risk, except the stakes were real territories and actual armies. Charlemagne got the eastern part, while Charlemagne was handed the west. It was less a peaceful co-rule and more a tense standoff, with each brother eyeing the other like a cat watching a mouse. The real kicker, their mother's involvement. Bertrada of Leon, who had a knack for meddling, tried to keep the peace by suggesting alliances, which in the medieval context often meant marrying off family members like pawns on a chessboard. But Charlemagne had other ideas. In 769, he embarked on a campaign against the Aquitanians, which was more about flexing his muscles than expanding his territory. Charlemagne, ever the supportive sibling, stayed put, probably watching with a mix of irritation and concern. Their alliance, if you could call it that, was as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Charlemagne's sudden death in 771, natural causes, they say, left Charlemagne the sole ruler of the Franks. Now, if you're picturing Charlemagne grieving by candlelight, let's adjust that image. He quickly seized the opportunity, taking control of Charlemagne's territories with the enthusiasm of a kid, finding out he's got the whole candy store to himself. Charlemagne's rise to power was a testament to his shrewdness and ambition. He wasn't just a warrior. He was a master strategist who understood the importance of alliances and loyalty. His court was a revolving door of nobles, each with their own agenda, yet Charlemagne had the uncanny ability to weave their ambitions into his grand vision. He knew when to crack the whip and when to extend the olive branch. It said he was a fan of the arts and encouraged learning, which is a nice way of saying he knew the value of propaganda before it was cool. Thus began the reign of Charlemagne, a ruler who would go on to shape medieval Europe in ways that still echo today. His early life, marked by familial intrigue and political savvy, set the stage for a legacy that was anything but ordinary. Forget the sanitized versions of history that paint him as a benevolent giant. Charlemagne was a man who danced with power, twirled with ambition, and occasionally tangoed with treachery, all while keeping an eye on the grand prize, the unification of Europe under his banner. Charlemagne didn't just sit back and enjoy his newly expanded kingdom like a medieval couch potato with a crown. Nope, he was more of a let's expand this empire kind of guy, and he had his eyes on some prime real estate, the Lombards and the Saxons. Now, if you think this was going to be a series of peaceful negotiations over a medieval cup of coffee, think again. Charlemagne was more of a convert or face the sword type of negotiator, the kind of guy who makes you rethink your life choices, or at least your choice of religion. Let's start with the Lombards, because who doesn't love a good story about family drama mixed with geopolitical ambition? Charlemagne's dealings with the Lombards kicked off in 773 when Desiderius, the king of the Lombards, had the audacity to challenge him. Desiderius was essentially the pesky neighbor who just wouldn't let go of a boundary dispute. But Charlemagne wasn't interested in a protracted legal battle. He preferred the kind of resolution that involved armies and sieges. He laid siege to Pavia, the Lombard capital, in 774, and after a solid 9 months, because good things come to those who wait, Desiderius was dethroned, and Charlemagne was crowned king of the Lombards. Now, you might think that being king of the Franks and king of the Lombards could lead to some serious identity crises, but Charlemagne handled it like a pro. He was all about efficiencies, managing his newly expanded territory like a medieval corporate merger. He didn't just conquer for the fun of it. There were economic strategies at play. The Lombards controlled important trade routes through Italy, and by taking over, Charlemagne got a nice boost to his empire's wealth. It was like acquiring prime beachfront property, except with more knights and fewer sunbathers. But Charlemagne's expansionist ambitions didn't stop at the Alps. Next up were the Saxons, and if you thought dealing with the Lombards was complex, the Saxons took things to a whole new level. These folks were not just going to roll over and let Charlemagne move in. The Saxon Wars, which kicked off around 772 and dragged on for over 3 decades, were less of a series of battles and more of a prolonged, bloody game of whack-a-mole. The Saxons, led by their charismatic leader Widukind, weren't interested in conversion or subjugation. They were more into their own brand of freedom, thank you very much, and they were willing to fight for it. Charlemagne's approach to the Saxons was a mix of military might and religious zeal. His convert or face the sword policy was essentially a medieval rebranding campaign with a twist: accept Christianity or experience its wrath firsthand. This tactic made him a hero to some, a villain to others, depending on which side of the sword you found yourself. For the Saxons, it was a brutal introduction to Frankish hospitality. Charlemagne's campaigns were relentless, marked by forced baptisms and the infamous massacre of Verdun in 782, where around 500 Saxon rebels were executed. Not exactly the kind of welcome wagon you'd hope for. But why all this effort? Was it really about spreading the Christian faith, or was there more to it? Spoiler alert. It was a bit of both, but mostly about power and resources. By subjugating the Saxons, Charlemagne secured a buffer zone that protected his empire's heartland. The Saxons' land was fertile and strategically located, providing not just agricultural benefits, but also a critical geopolitical advantage. Think of it as securing the backyard before expanding the mansion. Charlemagne's campaigns were expensive, too. War wasn't just about swords and shields. It was about logistics, supply lines, and managing a medieval economy without a nifty app to track expenses. Financing these campaigns required clever economic maneuvering. Charlemagne was not above taxing his subjects with a heavy hand or seizing church property when necessary. He understood the economic engine behind his military machine, ensuring that his conquests didn't just expand his territory, but also his treasury. In the end, Charlemagne's expansion tactics were a blend of brute force, religious fervor, and economic savvy. He was simultaneously admired and feared, a ruler who could unite lands and people under his banner while leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. The romantic image of Charlemagne as a noble warrior king is tempered by the harsh realities of his reign. He was a man of his time, a time when the sword often spoke louder than words, and power was the only currency that mattered. So, as we leave Charlemagne in the midst of his conquests, remember that his story is far from over. He's still got a lot of empire building ahead, and let's not forget the cultural and administrative revolution he'd eventually spearhead. But for now, keep this in mind. Whether you were a Lombard, a Saxon, or a Frank, living under Charlemagne's rule was never dull, and it was rarely peaceful. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the life of this legendary yet controversial figure, a leader who changed the face of Europe, one conquest at a time. With Charlemagne's empire expanding faster than a medieval waistline during a feast, you might think he'd kick back and bask in his conquests. But no, our guy Charlemagne had a penchant for paperwork that would put a modern-day bureaucrat to shame. If you think managing an empire was all about swinging swords and wearing fancy headgear, think again. Charlemagne was knee-deep in administration, and his reforms were groundbreaking, or at least they made the chaos slightly more organized. First up, let's talk about Charlemagne's fondness for the written word. He wasn't just about conquering lands. He was obsessed with making sure everyone knew about it in writing. He loved issuing capitularies. Think of them as medieval government memos that covered everything from church laws to the price of bread. These documents were like the ancient version of terms and conditions, only slightly more riveting. Charlemagne believed in the power of the written word to unify his sprawling empire, which was no small task when literacy rates were about as low as the average knight's bowling score. Now, if you're picturing Charlemagne as a lone wolf scribbling away by candlelight, hold that thought. He had a whole team of scribes and scholars, including the famous Alcuin of York. This guy was like the Steve Jobs of medieval education, leading what came to be known as the Carolingian Renaissance. Under Charlemagne's rule, schools were established, and the liberal arts were given a much-needed boost. Reading, writing, and arithmetic, those medieval staples, were back in style, all part of Charlemagne's grand plan to educate his subjects, or at the very least, ensure they could read his capitularies. But Charlemagne wasn't just about upgrading education. He also had a knack for currency reform. Before his reign, the Frankish economy was about as stable as a juggler on a unicycle. Charlemagne introduced the silver denarius, a coin that became the standard across his empire. This wasn't just a matter of fiscal policy, it was an economic revolution. By standardizing the currency, Charlemagne facilitated trade and strengthened his grip on his territories. It was like the euro, but without the hassle of a central bank or, actual euros. And then there's governance. Charlemagne was all about decentralization before it was cool. He divided his empire into counties, each overseen by a count who reported directly to him. To keep these guys in check, he sent out missi dominici. Think of them as medieval auditors with a side of moral oversight. They were tasked with ensuring that local officials were enforcing the king's laws and not just embezzling funds for an extra mote or two. Charlemagne's governance reforms were like a medieval version of quality control, ensuring that his empire ran smoothly, or as smoothly as you could expect when messages traveled at the speed of a horse. Now, let's dive into Charlemagne's attempts, a kind of proto-European union. He had this dream of a unified Christian Europe, a vision that was part religious conviction and part power play. Charlemagne's reign was marked by a flurry of alliances and treaties, each more Byzantine than the last. He was a master at marrying off his relatives to secure alliances, turning family gatherings into diplomatic summits. This guy was like the ultimate wedding planner, but with more chain mail and fewer floral arrangements. Charlemagne's vision of a united Europe wasn't just about peace and love, though. It was about control and influence. By aligning himself with the papacy, Charlemagne ensured that his rule had the blessing of the church, which was the medieval equivalent of a blue checkmark on social media. His coronation as Emperor of the Romans in 800 was a masterstroke, a political maneuver that solidified his power and gave him the legitimacy to call the shots across Europe. But let's not get too misty-eyed here. Charlemagne's empire was as much about coercion as it was about cooperation. His vision of unity often involved a fair amount of strong-arming, with a side of convert or else. His reign was a delicate balancing act of carrot and stick, diplomacy and domination. He was a man of contradictions, a ruler who could be both enlightened and ruthless, often in the same breath. In the grand tapestry of history, Charlemagne's administrative genius stands out like a well-embroidered patch amid the chaos of medieval Europe. He was a man who understood the power of structure and organization, who saw the potential of education and governance to shape the future. Yet, his legacy is as much about the harsh realities of his reign as it is about the romantic myths that surround him. Charlemagne was a ruler who could build empires and burn bridges, a man whose ambition knew no bounds. So, as we leave Charlemagne in the midst of his administrative overhaul, remember that the story doesn't end here. His legacy would ripple through the ages, influencing leaders and empires for centuries to come. But for now, let's bask in the irony. A man who wielded the sword with such fervor also had a surprising fondness for the pen. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the life of Charlemagne, a figure as complex and captivating as the age he lived in. And speaking of pens and swords, let's head to Rome, where Charlemagne's story takes a turn worthy of a medieval Netflix adaptation. It's the year 800, and our man Charlemagne is about to receive the ultimate endorsement, a coronation as Emperor of the Romans by none other than Pope Leo Roman III. If you're picturing a grand, harmonious ceremony, complete with angelic choirs and a standing ovation, hold on to your chain mail. This was less of a glorious crowning moment and more of an awkward family dinner where everyone's jostling for the best seat. First, let's unravel the lead-up. Pope Leo Roman III, a man with a lot on his papal plate, wasn't exactly the most popular guy in Rome. In fact, in 799, he found himself in a bit of a pickle when he was attacked and almost blinded by some rather disgruntled Romans. Apparently, Leo's policies were about as popular as a tax hike. Faced with this insurrection, Leo fled north to the only guy who could help, Charlemagne. Enter Charlemagne, the medieval fixer, who saw an opportunity in Leo's plight. Charlemagne's decision to support the Pope wasn't an act of pure benevolence. It was a calculated move in the grand chess game of European politics. Now, onto the main event. On December 25, 800, while most of us would be contemplating leftovers and gift receipts, Charlemagne was in St. Peter's Basilica, being crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo Roman III. Charlemagne knelt at the altar, and Leo placed a crown on his head, declaring him the Emperor. The crowd, probably a mix of genuine supporters and those just there for the spectacle, cheered. But here's where the story gets spicy. Charlemagne claimed he was taken by surprise by this whole emperor gig, a claim that's as believable as a used car salesman's promises. Why the surprise act, you ask? Well, back in the day, the title of emperor was supposed to be a big deal, a Roman thing, and the Byzantine Empire wasn't too thrilled about a Frankish king hijacking their thunder. Charlemagne's surprise was a diplomatic maneuver, a way to claim he hadn't planned to step on any imperial toes. It was all part of the political theater, a medieval drama with Leo stirring the pot to assert the church's power to crown emperors, and Charlemagne playing along to solidify his influence. But let's not kid ourselves. This coronation was a power play, pure and simple. It gave Charlemagne a new political edge, allowing him to wrestle with the Byzantines over who was the real Roman emperor. It was a bold move, and one that confirmed Charlemagne's status as the big cheese of the medieval world. The title of emperor was more than just a fancy hat and a new signature. It was a statement of dominion over a vast territory that stretched from the Pyrenees to the Elbe, from the North Sea to the Adriatic. Now, let's bust some myths about Charlemagne's image as the father of Europe. This wasn't a man who woke up one day with dreams of unity and peace. His crowning ambition was less about creating a harmonious continent and more about consolidating power under his rule. The romantic notion of Charlemagne as a benevolent patriarch, nurturing a united Europe, is a historical sugarcoat, sweet but not quite the truth. In reality, he was a shrewd leader who understood that power came from both the sword and the blessing of the church. Charlemagne's empire was a patchwork of territories, each with its own customs and laws, held together by the force of his will and the fear of his armies. His rule was less about fostering European brotherhood and more about ensuring that the various regions and peoples were kept under control. The so-called unity was maintained through a mix of diplomacy, military might, and strategic marriages. It was a delicate balancing act, and Charlemagne was the circus master, ensuring that the plates kept spinning. Economically, the empire was a mixed bag. Charlemagne's coinage reforms and trade policies had laid the groundwork for economic stability, but the empire was still a collection of vastly different economies, with local lords often acting in their own interests. The idea of a unified economic system was a distant dream, and Charlemagne's efforts were more about aligning these disparate forces under a single banner than creating a cohesive economic entity. And let's not forget the cultural aspect. Charlemagne's court was a melting pot of scholars and artists, thanks to his Carolingian Renaissance. But this cultural revival was as much about propaganda as it was about enlightenment. By promoting learning and the arts, Charlemagne was crafting an image of himself as a cultured and enlightened ruler, a medieval spin doctor at work. The Renaissance was a tool to legitimize his rule, to show the world that the Franks were not just a bunch of sword-wielding barbarians, but a people of culture and sophistication. In the end, Charlemagne's reign was a story of contradictions. He was a man who could both unite and divide, who could be both brutal and enlightened. The title of Father of Europe is a catchy headline, but the reality was far more complex. Charlemagne was a ruler of his time, a time when power was measured in land and loyalty, and the price of peace was often paid in blood. As we leave Charlemagne basking in his new imperial glow, remember that the story doesn't end here. His legacy would continue to shape Europe long after his death, influencing rulers and empires for centuries to come. But for now, let's savor the irony. A man who wielded the sword with such fervor also knew the power of the crown. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the life of Charlemagne, a figure as complex and captivating as the age he lived in. So, as we continue to unravel the life of Charlemagne, let's switch gears and talk about succession planning. Or, in Charlemagne's case, the art of leaving a massive empire teetering on the edge of chaos. It's one thing to conquer half of Europe. It's another to figure out who gets the keys to the empire when you're not around to referee. Charlemagne, ever the medieval visionary, decided to split his empire among his sons. A decision that makes sense if you're trying to ensure sibling rivalry remains a top sport in the family. Charlemagne had 3 legitimate sons: Charles the Younger, Pepin of Italy, and Louis the Pious. Now, if Charlemagne had access to a modern-day will-riding service, he might have avoided the whole divide and potentially conquer approach. But alas, he went with the classic medieval strategy of partitioning land like a jigsaw puzzle. Each son was granted a slice of the empire to rule. Charles got the lion's share, the Frankish heartland. Pepin was handed the Italian territories, and Louis was given Aquitaine. It sounds fair until you realize that this setup was a power keg waiting for a match. By 806, Charlemagne had formalized this plan in the Divisio Regnorum, a document that outlined how his empire would be split. It was like leaving your kids an estate with a detailed map and a note saying, "Good luck not fighting over this." But the best-laid plans of medieval kings often go awry. Charles the Younger died in 811, followed by Pepin in 810. That left Louis the Pious as the last man standing, and by default, the sole heir to Charlemagne's empire. It was a bit like winning a race, because everyone else tripped and fell. When Charlemagne died in 814, at the ripe age of 72, his empire was left to Louis, whose epithet, the Pious, suggests a man more comfortable in a chapel than a battlefield. Charlemagne's death marked the end of an era, but it was hardly the beginning of a peaceful transition. Louis inherited an empire held together by the sheer force of his father's will. As you can imagine, Louis had a bit of a rough time trying to fill those colossal shoes. His reign was marked by internal strife and external threats, as various factions vied for power. Now, let's talk about Charlemagne's posthumous fame. It's one thing to be a legendary ruler while you're alive. It's another to become a myth after you're gone. Charlemagne's legacy grew in ways that would make a modern-day influencer green with envy. His name became synonymous with the ideal Christian king, a narrative crafted by the church, historians, and poets who had a flair for embellishment. The Song of Roland, for instance, turned him into a chivalric superhero, complete with a noble court and epic battles. If Charlemagne had a PR team, they were working overtime. The myths that surrounded Charlemagne were as much about branding as they were about reality. He became the poster child for the Holy Roman Empire, a medieval construct that was neither holy nor Roman nor much of an empire. But hey, branding is everything, right? The church latched onto Charlemagne's image, portraying him as a defender of the faith, a narrative that conveniently glossed over the less savory aspects of his reign, like the aforementioned convert or die policy. And let's not forget the relics. Charlemagne's tomb in Aachen became a pilgrimage site, attracting visitors eager to bask in the aura of sanctity associated with the great emperor. In 1165, Frederick Barbarossa even got him canonized, though this was more of a political move than a reflection of saintly behavior. Charlemagne's legacy was crafted with a delicate blend of truth and fiction, a testament to the power of storytelling in shaping history. But let's not let the myths overshadow the reality. Charlemagne's reign was a complex tapestry of ambition, warfare, and administration. He was a man who understood the art of governance as much as the art of war, a ruler who could be both ruthless and reformist. His legacy was not just the empire he built, but the systems he put in place, systems that would influence European governance for centuries. Economically, Charlemagne's reforms left a lasting mark. His currency standardization and trade policies laid the groundwork for a more unified economy, even if his successors struggled to maintain it. Politically, his model of decentralized governance, with local counts and missi dominici, was a precursor to the feudal system that would dominate medieval Europe. Culturally, the Carolingian Renaissance sparked a revival of learning that would echo through the ages. Yet, for all his achievements, Charlemagne's greatest legacy might be the lessons learned from his failures. His succession planning, or lack thereof, highlighted the challenges of maintaining a vast empire without a clear line of succession. His reliance on force to impose unity revealed the limitations of power without consensus. In many ways, Charlemagne's story is a cautionary tale about the perils of empire building, a reminder that even the mightiest rulers are bound by the limits of their time. As we wrap up our journey through the life of Charlemagne, let's leave with this thought. History is as much about the stories we tell as the facts we uncover. Charlemagne was a man who knew how to wield both the sword and the pen, a ruler whose life was a tapestry of contradictions. His legacy is a blend of myth and reality, a testament to the enduring power of narrative. And in the end, perhaps that's the real lesson of Charlemagne's reign. The stories we tell about our past shape the world we live in today. You're a Roman citizen in the bustling heart of the empire, and the air is buzzing with news that makes a gladiatorial combat seem like a Sunday picnic. It's 165 AD, and the Antonine Plague is the unwelcome guest at the party. You know those Roman soldiers, the ones who marched off to the east to expand the glory of Rome. Well, they brought back more than just war stories and exotic spices. They returned with something particularly insidious, a disease that doesn't care about your toga or your social status. The Antonine Plague, likely smallpox or measles, wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a full-blown catastrophe. Picture this. Roman roads, the pride of the empire's infrastructure, became superhighways for this microscopic invader. Those meticulously laid stones, stretching over 250,000 miles, meant to connect the far-flung corners of this vast empire, now served as the perfect express lanes for the plague, zipping from city to city faster than a chariot race. Trade routes, once the veins of economic prosperity, turned into arteries of doom. Ships crisscrossed the Mediterranean, their holds bursting with goods, and unbeknownst to the sailors, teeming with pathogens. Ports like Ostia became hotbeds of infection, where the plague eagerly jumped from sailor to merchant to the everyday Roman trying to snag a fresh fish for dinner. Now, let's talk about the societal panic. Romans prided themselves on their stoicism, a philosophical backbone that taught them to keep calm and carry on. But even the Stoics would have had a tough time keeping their cool when their neighbors were dropping like flies. The Senate, Rome's version of a problem-solving committee, sprang into action, or rather, they tried. Their attempts to manage public fear were, shall we say, a mixed bag. In an era when medical knowledge was more about balancing humors than understanding germs, the Senate's early public health measures felt like groping around in the dark. Public gatherings were discouraged, temples were cleaned, sacrifices were made, and the guards were implored for mercy. Sound familiar? It's almost like a second-century version of flattening the curve, minus the face masks and hand sanitizer. The Roman government even attempted to quarantine the sick. But here's the kicker. When half the city is sick, who do you quarantine? And as for the remedies, well, they were as varied as they were ineffective. Some Romans believed that wearing amulets could fend off the disease, as if a fancy necklace could outwit a virus. Meanwhile, you, the average Roman citizen, had to navigate this chaos. You might have been stuck in line at the apothecary, hoping to get your hands on some herbal concoction that promised to keep the plague at bay. Or maybe you were one of the many who sought solace in the arms of the divine, praying for a miracle that science couldn't yet deliver. The juxtaposition between the cool, collected facade of Roman stoicism and the practical absurdities of the time is almost laughable. Here was a society that could engineer aqueducts to bring fresh water into the city, but couldn't figure out why washing hands was a good idea. But hey, nobody's perfect. Right. Even as the plague ravaged the population, with estimates suggesting that up to 5 million people perished, life somehow continued. The bread and circus ethos of Rome endured, albeit with fewer spectators. Gladiatorial games carried on, albeit with a smaller audience, because if there's one thing Romans loved, it was a good spectacle, even in the face of doom. In this unexpected visitor, the plague, Romans faced a challenge that no legion could conquer. It was a harsh reminder that even the mightiest empire could be brought to its knees by forces unseen. But you, the resilient Roman citizen, had to soldier on, balancing fear with an oddly comforting sense of normalcy. After all, plagues come and go, but Rome is eternal. At least, that's what you'd like to believe as you hunker down and wait for the storm to pass. So you're hunkering down, hoping the storm of the Antonine plague blows over, but let's be real. This is Rome, and nothing ever just blows over. The plague was like an unwelcome houseguest who wouldn't leave, and while it was crashing on Rome's couch, it was wreaking havoc on the economy. Forget about a labor shortage. This was a labor crisis. With up to 5 million people dead, it wasn't just a few missing workers. It was like half your office vanished without a trace. Farms, abandoned, workshops, silent, markets, more tumbleweeds than people. Now, if you think inflation is bad today, try living in a world where the price of grain could double in a matter of weeks. That's right, wheat prices skyrocketed faster than a Roman charioteer on a dare. And it wasn't just about food. The cost of everything from sandals to togas shot up, because when fewer people are around to make things, those things get expensive. Supply and demand, baby. Except with a lot more doom and gloom. And in the midst of this economic chaos, who was supposed to keep the empire's wheels turning? Enter Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who was juggling more problems than a circus clown with a caffeine addiction. Marcus is often remembered as the philosopher king, the guy who wrote Meditations and supposedly ruled with wisdom and a steady hand. Sounds great, right? Except real life isn't quite so rosy. Imagine trying to be philosophical while your empire is disintegrating faster than a Roman aqueduct in a landslide. Marcus had a lot on his plate. Military campaigns against pesky Germanic tribes, a budget stretched thinner than a Roman legion's patience, and a plague that wouldn't quit. And yet, he was somehow expected to keep the empire from collapsing like a poorly built temple. Spoiler alert, he wasn't always successful. The myth of the cool-headed philosopher king is nice and all, but the reality was much grittier. The guy was constantly putting out fires, and sometimes he had to choose which ones to let burn. The army was hemorrhaging men, and not just because they were getting skewered on the battlefield. The plague didn't have a favorite team. It took down soldiers and civilians alike. Marcus had to recruit new troops, often scraping the bottom of the barrel. The ranks were filled with anyone who could hold a sword, farmers, shepherds, you name it. Desperate times, desperate measures. But let's not forget the regular Roman citizens trying to make it work in this topsy-turvy world. With labor in short supply, many Romans had to get creative in ways that ranged from clever to downright absurd. Take the humble Roman bath, for example. With fewer slaves to keep the hypo coursed, the ancient underfloor heating system running, some bathhouses started cutting hours or even shutting down. A tragedy not only for hygiene, but for social life too. How do you gossip about your neighbor's toga if you're not soaking in a coldarium? And speaking of togas, fabric was suddenly a hot commodity. Those who could afford it started sporting the same toga multiple times. Scandalous, the ultimate fashion crime in a society that valued appearance so highly. But when life gives you lemons, or in this case, plague, you wear the toga you have, not the one you want. Some Romans even tried to game the system. When the cost of olive oil spiked, enterprising individuals began diluting it with whatever they could find. Olive oil fraud. Imagine the horror of pouring what you think is premium oil only to discover it's been cut with something questionable. But desperate times call for desperate measures, right? And when the economy is as unpredictable as a Roman guard's mood, you do what you can to survive. Social dynamics shifted too. With the population decimated, the rigid class structure started to wobble. Freedmen, once seen as mere cogs in the Roman machine, found themselves in higher demand. Suddenly, they could negotiate better terms, a little more pay, and a tad more respect. But of course, not everyone was thrilled about this. The old guard, clinging to traditions like barnacles to a ship's hull, grumbled about the changing times. But what could they do? The world was moving on, with or without their blessing. So there you have it, a Rome teetering on the edge, an economy in flux, and a society forced to adapt or perish. Marcus Aurelius did his best to hold it all together, but even a philosopher king can only do so much when the guards seem to have stacked the deck against him. It was a time of challenge, change, and yes, even a little bit of chaos. But through it all, the Romans did what they always did. They survived. They improvised. They found humor in the absurdity of it all. And most importantly, they carried on, one toga at a time. And just like that, in the midst of economic chaos and toga-wearing woes, the Romans had to reckon with a grim new reality, the limits of their medical knowledge. Picture this. You're feeling feverish, your head's pounding, and you've got a rash that's more alarming than a Roman senator caught in a scandal. Do you head to the local physician? Well, in 165 AD, that's a bit like asking a modern-day dentist to fix your Wi-Fi. Enter Galen, the celebrity doctor of the Roman world, who was as close as you could get to a medical superstar. Born in 129 AD, Galen cut his teeth in Pergamon, a city known for its impressive library, and presumably a decent selection of scrolls on how to treat a hangnail with leeches. He eventually made his way to Rome and became the go-to physician for the gladiators, where his success rate was measured in how many fighters could still swing a sword after treatment. Talk about high stakes. Galen's observations during the Antonine Plague became the cornerstone of Roman medical knowledge, which sounds impressive until you realize it was more of a cornerstone in a house of sand. His notes were detailed, sure, but they were crammed with ideas that would make modern scientists do a spit take. He was obsessed with the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and believed that any imbalance in these bodily fluids was the root of all illness. Feeling under the weather, must be too much black bile, got a cough, sounds like a phlegm problem. In a world without microscopes, these theories were the best guesses of the time, even if they were about as accurate as using astrology to pick a stock portfolio. Now, imagine your doctor prescribes a treatment plan based on these theories. Bloodletting was a popular choice, where the cure for a fever was to open a vein and let the bad blood flow out. It's like trying to fix a leaky sink by drilling more holes in the pipes. And if that didn't work, there was always trepanation, drilling a hole in your skull to let out evil spirits. Who needs anesthesia when you have the enduring charm of Roman stoicism? But for all his missteps, Galen did contribute some useful ideas. He emphasized the importance of observation and dissection, paving the way for future medical practices. It's like he was trying to play chess while the rest of Rome was stuck on tic-tac-toe. His notes were copied and revered for centuries, becoming the medical equivalent of gospel, despite being riddled with errors. It's a testament to his influence that his flawed theories held sway until the Renaissance, proving that old habits, or in this case, old humors, die hard. While Galen was busy writing his medical magnum opus, ordinary Romans were left to navigate a healthcare system that was, frankly, a hot mess. Temples dedicated to Asclepius, the god of healing, became makeshift hospitals. Here, desperate citizens offered votive offerings, little clay body parts representing the afflicted area, in hopes of divine intervention. It's like a celestial version of Yelp, where you hope a 5-star review from Asclepius himself would cure your ailments. And let's not forget about the power of prayer. Romans were nothing if not devout in their superstition, and during the plague they dialed up their religious fervor to 11. They invoked a pantheon of gods, each with a specific portfolio. Coughing up a lung, try Mercury, the messenger god, to speed up your recovery. Got a fever? Apollo, the god of medicine, might be your guy. When all else failed, there was always Fortuna, the goddess of luck, because at that point, why not hedge your bets? In this swirling mix of science, superstition, and sheer guesswork, Roman healthcare was a theater of the absurd. Yet somehow, amidst the chaos, the Romans clung to the belief that they could outwit the plague with the right combination of prayers, potions, and positive thinking. It's a classic case of human optimism, or perhaps hubris, at its finest. The reliance on divine intervention didn't stop at the temples. Public rituals and sacrifices became a common scene, with animals being offered to the gods in hopes of appeasing their wrath. It's like trying to bribe your way out of a speeding ticket with a ham sandwich, well-intentioned but fundamentally misguided. The Romans believed these offerings could turn the tide, a testament to their enduring faith in the supernatural, even as the natural world crumbled around them. As we ponder these ancient practices, it's easy to scoff at their naivety, but let's not be too hasty. After all, while modern medicine has come a long way, we still have our fair share of quackery and questionable cures. Detox tease anyone. The human penchant for quick fixes and miracle cures is as old as civilization itself, proving that while our tools may evolve, our desires remain remarkably consistent. So here we are, with Galen's flawed but influential legacy, a healthcare system that relied on both science and the supernatural, and a society trying to make sense of a world turned upside down by an unseen enemy. The Romans' struggle against the Antonine Plague is a potent reminder of the precarious balance between knowledge and belief, and the lengths we'll go to stay healthy when the odds are stacked against us. In the end, the Romans were left to grapple with the harsh truth that even the grandest empire couldn't conquer nature's smallest adversaries. Their story is one of resilience and resourcefulness, of a people who faced the unknown with a mix of fear, faith, and funny-looking amulets. And as history marches on, their experiences remind us that while the specifics may change, the human condition, and our quest for health, remains ever the same. So, as the Romans were busy grappling with the microscopic menace, the cultural canvas of the empire was undergoing a makeover that would make a toga change look like a minor wardrobe adjustment. You see, when life hands you plagues, you don't just make lemonade, you rewrite the recipe for survival itself. Art, literature, and public entertainment became both a mirror and a balm for a society trying to keep its chin up while its knees wobbled. First, let's chat about Roman comedy and theater, where gallows humor became the flavor of the day. Imagine sitting in a crowded amphitheater, social distancing. Never heard of it, watching a play where the punchlines are as dark as the plague itself. These performances were the equivalent of ancient stand-up comedy, where jesters poked fun at everything from the ineptitude of doctors to the absurdity of Roman guards playing dice with human lives. Gallows humor wasn't just a coping mechanism. It was a survival tool, a way to laugh in the face of despair when crying seemed like the only alternative. Take, for instance, the comedies of Plautus and Terence, where the stage was a safe space to mark the very institutions that seemed powerless against the plague. It's as if the playwrights were saying, hey, if the gods can't stop this, at least we can laugh about it. Roman audiences garbled it up, finding comfort in the shared experience of laughter, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit could find light. And speaking of the gods, let's dive into the swirling sea of Roman religion. The plague wasn't just a health crisis, it was a theological conundrum. The old pantheon of Jupiter, Venus, and Apollo suddenly seemed as effective as using a sundial in a cave. People began hedging their bets, offering prayers to any deity who might lend an ear, often with the fervor of someone trying to win a celestial lottery. As traditional Roman gods were perceived as dropping the ball, new religious ideas began to gain traction. Enter Christianity, stage left. At the time, it was still the underdog religion, but gaining momentum. Kind of like how craft beer began to chip away at the macrobrew monopoly. Christians offered a narrative that resonated with the existential dread of the times. Suffering had meaning, and there was hope beyond this life. It was a message that hit home like a well-aimed gladius, offering a spiritual salve to those searching for answers amid the chaos. The rise of Christianity during the plague underscored a shift in the religious landscape. While the old gods demanded rituals and sacrifices that felt increasingly hollow, Christianity promised a personal relationship with the divine, a comforting thought when everything else seemed to be falling apart. Converts were drawn to the faith like sailors to a lighthouse, eager for a beacon of hope in a stormy sea of uncertainty. Meanwhile, Roman literature and storytelling took on a new role, preserving morale and creating a sense of continuity in a world that felt perpetually unmoored. Tales of heroism, both historical and mythological, were retold with renewed vigor. Storytellers spun yarns of past glories and future possibilities, reminding the populace that Rome had faced challenges before and emerged stronger. It was like a historical pep talk, where legend and reality danced together to bolster the collective psyche. The myth-making machine went into overdrive, crafting narratives that reassured citizens of Rome's eternal nature. Stories of past emperors, military victories, and divine favor were embellished and retold, not as mere entertainment, but as vital threads in the fabric of Roman identity. It was a clever bit of psychological warfare against despair. After all, if Rome had survived Hannibal, surely it would outlast a pesky plague. But let's not romanticize it too much. While these stories offered a sense of continuity, they also glossed over harsh realities. The idealized versions of Roman resilience often left out the messy, uncomfortable bits, like the fact that survival often hinged on a mix of luck, privilege, and sheer grit. The tales made it sound like every Roman citizen was a stoic hero, when in reality, many were just trying to get through the day without losing their sandals or sanity. Art, too, reflected the shifting cultural currents. While traditional Roman art celebrated the grandeur of the empire, think marble busts of emperors with expressions of divine detachment, the art of the Plague era introduced a rawer, more human element. Statues and frescoes captured everyday scenes, from the bustling market to the Sama funeral, portraying the breadth of Roman life in all its messy, vibrant glory. It was a nod to the common citizen, a recognition that every life, no matter how small, was part of the larger Roman tapestry. In this tumultuous period, the arts became a lifeline, a way to process grief and find meaning in the madness. They offered an escape, a chance to step outside the immediate struggles and see the world through a different lens. Whether through the biting wit of a play, the comforting narrative of a story, or the evocative imagery of a painting, culture provided a refuge, a place where the Romans could lose themselves and in the process find the strength to carry on. So there you have it, a Rome reshaped by the scourge of plague, with culture as its steadfast companion. As the empire wavered, its people clung to the arts and stories that defined them, finding solace in humor, faith, and creativity. It was a testament to the enduring power of culture to uplift and unite, even as the world seemed determined to unravel at the seams. And as history rolled on, these cultural shifts would leave an indelible mark, shaping the legacy of Rome in ways both profound and unexpected. And so, as Rome's cultural canvas shifted under the weight of plague and change, its legacy was being rewritten with a brush dipped in both resilience and decay. The Antonine Plague, that pesky guest no one invited, left an indelible mark on the empire, one that would be felt long after the last cough echoed through the amphitheaters. It didn't just decimate the population, it shook the very foundations of what it meant to be the unassailable Roman superpower. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of it. The plague, which likely claimed up to a quarter of the empire's population, didn't just take lives. It drained the empire of its lifeblood. Economic productivity plummeted like a toga in a windstorm. With fewer hands to till the fields, the agricultural backbone of Rome began to creak and groan. Grain shortages became the new normal, sparking famines that made the overpriced wheat of yesteryear seem like a bargain. The ripple effects reached far and wide, from the smallest villa to the grandest patrician estate. Politically, the plague left a vacuum that no amount of imperial posturing could fill. The Roman army, already stretched thinner than a Roman's patience at a toga party, was left scrambling to recruit anyone who could hold a sword without dropping it on their foot. This desperate need for soldiers saw the inclusion of more non-Roman recruits, barbarians, as they were charmingly called, into the legions. These recruits brought with them their own customs and loyalties, gradually diluting that ironclad Roman identity as if mixing fine wine with questionable water. The Senate, Rome's once august body of elderly wisdom, found itself increasingly sidelined. Its emperors leaned on military might and personal charisma to hold the empire together. The balance of power shifted, and not in a good way. Think of it as trying to keep a teetering stack of amphorae upright with one hand tied behind your back. And speaking of emperors, post-plague Rome saw a revolving door of rulers more focused on immediate survival than long-term stability. The notion of an unbreakable Roman superpower took a hit harder than a gladiator in the Colosseum. Now, it's tempting to romanticize Rome as a monolith of eternal glory, but the reality was messier. The empire, vast and varied as it was, relied heavily on a delicate balance of local governance, military strength, and economic prosperity. The Antonine Plague was like a nasty virus in Rome's operating system, one that exposed vulnerabilities and left the empire scrambling to patch itself together with whatever was at hand. Yet, amid the chaos, there were lessons learned, lessons that resonate eerily with our modern experiences. The Antonine Plague was a brutal reminder of the interconnectedness of the world. The same roads and trade routes that spread culture and commerce also carried disease with ruthless efficiency. It highlighted the need for a coordinated response, a lesson that echoes in today's globalized world where a sneeze in one corner can cause a panic in another. The Romans, bless them, were forced to reckon with the fact that no amount of marble monuments or military might could truly shield them from the whims of nature. It's a humbling truth, and one that still rings true today. For all our advancements, we remain at the mercy of forces beyond our control, and our responses, both individual and collective, define our resilience. And let's not forget the human spirit, that indefatigable force that keeps us moving forward even when everything else seems to be falling apart. The Romans, with their penchant for humor and storytelling, found ways to cope, to laugh, to carry on. It's a testament to the enduring power of culture and community, the idea that even in the darkest times, we find light in shared experiences and a good joke. So, as we look back at the Antonine Plague, it's not just a tale of woe and destruction. It's a story of adaptation, of a society forced to evolve in the face of adversity. Rome, for all its grandeur, was not immortal, but its legacy, its art, its ideas, its spirit, endures. It's a reminder that while empires may rise and fall, the human capacity for resilience and reinvention is what truly stands the test of time. And there you have it, a history lesson wrapped in the toga of humor and harsh reality, served with a side of perspective. As we navigate our own pandemics and challenges, let's remember that we're not so different from those ancient Romans. We're all just trying to find our way, one toga-clad step at a time, with a chuckle in the face of chaos and a nod to the resilience that defines us all. When Muhammad shuffled off this mortal coil in 632 AD, he left behind more than just a new faith. He inadvertently set off a scramble for control that would make Game of Thrones look like a children's puppet show. The Prophet had crafted a tight-knit community out of the Arabian sands, and now this burgeoning band of believers had to grapple with the big question. Who's in charge now that the main man is gone? Enter the Umayyads, a family that knew a thing or two about seizing the moment. In the wake of Muhammad's death, the Arabian Peninsula was a hotbed of political intrigue, religious fervor, and let's be honest, a fair bit of opportunism. This was not merely a spiritual movement anymore. It was rapidly morphing into a political and military powerhouse. The Umayyads were like the savvy business moguls of the time, eyeing the potential for growth and influence beyond the dusty borders of Arabia. The Umayyad story finds its roots in the complex mesh of alliances and rivalries that unfolded in the early days of Islam. As followers of Islam mourned their prophet, the question of succession became the mother of all debates, and boy, did it get heated. Abu Bakr, a close companion of Muhammad, was chosen as the first caliph, but not without controversy. His selection sparked a debate that would eventually split the Islamic world into Sunni and Shia factions. Talk about sibling rivalry taken to epic proportions. Meanwhile, Muawiyah, a name you'll want to remember, was biding his time. A talented governor and a member of the influential Umayyad family, Muawiyah had the shrewdness of a chess grandmaster. His real game began when he became the governor of Syria in 639 AD, just 7 years after Muhammad's death. Syria, you see, was the Silicon Valley of the ancient world, wealthy, strategically located, and buzzing with potential. Muawiyah was not just good at his job, he was exceptional. He turned Syria into his power base, complete with a loyal army and a well-oiled administration machine. As the years rolled on, the first 4 caliphs, known collectively as the rightly guided, came and went, each carrying the torch of leadership with varying degrees of success and turmoil. The last of them, Ali, was assassinated in 661 AD, an event that sent shockwaves through the Islamic community. With Ali's death, the stage was set for Muawiyah to make his move. He wasn't just another player, he was ready to flip the board. Muawiyah's rise to power was not just about his political savvy, it was about timing, opportunity, and a fair bit of muscle. He declared himself caliph and shifted the political center of the Islamic world to Damascus. This wasn't just a change of address, It was a bold statement. By moving the capital from Medina to Damascus, Muawiyah signaled that the Islamic Empire was not just an Arabian affair anymore. It was a cosmopolitan empire in the making. Under Muawiyah's reign, from 661 to 680 AD, the Umayyad Caliphate began to expand like a well-watered plant in a desert. And expand it did, reaching into North Africa, Persia, and even knocking on the doors of Europe. It was like watching a small tech startup suddenly becoming a global giant. But power didn't just fall into Muawiyah's lap. It was the result of a careful blend of diplomacy, military might, and administrative prowess. He knew that to hold this empire together, he needed more than just swords and shields. He needed an efficient bureaucracy and a loyal military. Despite all the glory, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. The Umayyads were often seen as secular rulers, more interested in maintaining power than upholding the spiritual purity of Islam. Critics accused them of living lavishly and ruling with an iron fist. But let's be honest, power has never been just about being virtuous, has it? It's a messy business, and the Umayyads were ready to get their hands dirty. Muawiyah's successors continued this legacy of expansion and consolidation, but they also faced constant challenges. Internal dissent, rival claimants to the caliphate, and the ever-present threat of rebellion kept them on their toes. In many ways, the Umayyad Caliphate was like a high-stakes poker game, with each ruler trying to outmaneuver opponents both within and outside their borders. While the Umayyads were busy building their empire, they were also laying down the cultural and administrative foundations that would leave a lasting legacy. They introduced Arabic as the administrative language, created a standardized currency, and built roads and cities that connected the far-flung corners of their empire. It was like watching a master craftsman at work, turning a chaotic collection of tribes into a cohesive and functioning state. As we delve deeper into the saga of the Umayyad Caliphate, it's clear that their story is not just about conquest and power. It's a tale of transformation, illustrating how a small desert community could evolve into a vast empire through a mix of faith, politics, and a healthy dose of opportunism. The Umayyads were far from perfect, but their ability to adapt and innovate in the face of challenges is a testament to their enduring influence on history. So, while the romanticized versions of these stories often gloss over the gritty details, the real tale is one of grit, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of power. As the Umayyads tightened their grip on power, they embarked on a journey that would make even the most hardened travel bloggers envious. Picture this, an empire stretching from Spain to the fringes of India by 750 AD. That's about 5,000 miles, give or take a few sand dunes. But how did they manage to spread their influence across such vast territory? Spoiler alert. It wasn't just divine inspiration fueling their expansion. Think of it more like a mix of strategic prowess, economic incentives, and let's be real, a fair amount of old-school swagger. First off, let's tackle the logistics. The Umayyads weren't just wandering around with a map and a dream. They had something far more practical, armies equipped and ready to march across continents. These weren't just ragtag groups of fighters either. We're talking about well-organized military units, complete with cavalry, infantry, and even a rudimentary form of supply chain management that would make modern logisticians nod in approval. The Umayyads knew that an army marches on its stomach, and they made darn sure those stomachs were full. Supplying armies across such vast lands was no small feat. With caravans carrying everything from food to weapons, they turned the desert into their personal highway system. But let's not forget the green stuff, cold, hard cash. While divine favor might get you through the door, money is what pays for the party. The Umayyads had a knack for tapping into the wealth of the regions they conquered. They implemented a tax system that was as efficient as it was lucrative. Non-Muslims paid a special tax called the jizya, while Muslims contributed through the zakat. This financial strategy not only filled the caliphate's coffers, but also incentivized conversion, making Islam the fast-growing faith it was destined to become. We can't talk expansion without mentioning the savvy alliances. The Umayyads were nothing if not diplomatic when it suited them. They forged alliances with local tribes and rulers, often offering them a place at the table in exchange for their loyalty. This wasn't just a unidirectional relationship. Local leaders, seeing the writing on the wall, often welcomed Umayyad rule recognizing the benefits of being part of a larger, more powerful entity. In many cases, these alliances were sealed with marriages, turning potential rivals into family. Now, let's talk about the geography. The Umayyads had an uncanny ability to see the strategic value of land. Take Spain, for example. When they crossed into the Iberian Peninsula in 711 AD, they weren't just looking for a change of scenery. Spain was a rich prize, with fertile lands and bustling trade routes. By 718 AD, the Umayyads had carved out a significant chunk of the peninsula, bringing new agricultural techniques and revitalizing the economy. It's like they found a fixer-upper and turned it into prime real estate. As for India, the situation was a bit more complex. The Umayyads' incursions into the Indian subcontinent were driven by both ambition and opportunity. They first ventured into Sind in 711 AD under the command of a young general named Muhammad ibn Qasim. This wasn't just a foray into new territory. It was a calculated move to control the trade routes and tap into the wealth of the region. The Indian campaigns proved to be both challenging and rewarding, showcasing the Umayyads' military adaptability and strategic foresight. But expansion wasn't just about marching armies and signing treaties. The Umayyads understood the power of infrastructure. They built roads, bridges, and even established postal routes to ensure communication across their vast empire. Imagine trying to send a message from Damascus to Cordoba without modern technology. That's the equivalent of mailing a letter from New York to Los Angeles and expecting it to arrive before the next ice age. Yet, the Umayyads managed it, creating a network that kept their sprawling empire connected. And let's not sugarcoat it, there were bumps along the way. Revolts and uprisings were as common as sandstorms in the desert. The Umayyads faced constant challenges from within and without. From the Berbers in North Africa to the rebellious factions within their own ranks, maintaining control was a perpetual game of whack-a-mole. But the Umayyads were nothing if not resilient. They adapted, negotiated, and when necessary, put down rebellions with a firm hand. Despite the challenges, the Umayyad Caliphate thrived. Their ability to blend military might, economic acumen, and strategic diplomacy transformed them from a local Arabian power into a global force. Yet, as grand as their empire was, it wasn't built solely on the back of conquest. The Umayyads fostered a cultural renaissance that would leave an indelible mark on history. They embraced the diverse cultures within their empire, promoting art, science, and philosophy. It was a golden age of learning, one that would see the preservation and expansion of knowledge that might have otherwise been lost to time. In summary, the Umayyad expansion was a complex tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, opportunity, and sheer determination. Yes, the myths of divine intervention and supernatural luck are tempting, but the real story is far more human and far more intriguing. It's a tale of strategic brilliance, economic innovation, and the relentless pursuit of power. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Umayyad Caliphate is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. So, as the Umayyad Caliphate strutted its stuff across continents, they quickly realized that keeping an empire wasn't just about swinging swords and signing treaties. No, it was about something even more important. Managing a wallet the size of a small planet. The real magic behind the Umayyads' rise was their ability to transform trade routes into lifelines of prosperity. Think of it as the ancient version of turning highways into dollar signs, except instead of toll booths, you had camel caravans and bustling bazaars. First stop on our economic tour, Damascus. This city was the beating heart of the Umayyad Empire, and not just because it was the political capital. Oh no, Damascus was a thriving hub of commerce and culture, a place where the Silk Road met the Roman roads, creating a superhighway of goods and ideas. The city's strategic position made it a magnet for traders from Asia, Africa, and Europe, all eager to exchange everything from spices and silk to ideas and innovations. It was like the Wall Street of the ancient world, except with more camels and fewer stockbrokers. But let's not kid ourselves. Damascus didn't just thrive on good vibes and trade winds. The Umayyads had a keen eye for profit, and they knew how to squeeze a dinar out of a dirham. Through a crafty system of taxation, they ensured that every bolt of silk and every ounce of spice that passed through their lands contributed to their coffers. Traders paid tolls, merchants were levied, and even the camels probably felt the pinch. This wasn't just a tax system, it was an economic engine that kept the empire humming. Now, slide over to the other side of the Mediterranean, and you'll find Cordoba. When the Umayyads took a liking to Spain, they didn't just waltz in and put their feet up. They turned Cordoba into one of the most vibrant cities of the age. Picture this. By the 10th century, Cordoba had a population of about 500,000, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time. It was a multicultural melting pot where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived, worked, and occasionally bickered side by side. But more importantly, they traded. Oh boy, did they trade. Under Umayyad rule, Cordoba became a beacon of wealth and culture. It was renowned for its architecture, its libraries, and its markets, which bustled with activity. The economy thrived on agriculture, textiles, and the production of luxury items like jewelry and leather goods. And let's not forget the olive oil and wine, because even in an Islamic empire, business was business, and trade knows no religious bounds. The Umayyads were like the original globalization gurus, harnessing the power of trade to fuel their empire's growth. But it wasn't all sunshine and souks. The Umayyads knew that to keep the cash flowing, they needed control. So, they established a network of roads and postal routes that would put any modern logistics company to shame. Imagine coordinating messages and goods across thousands of miles without smartphones or GPS. Yet, the Umayyads managed it, creating a communication system that kept their empire connected and commerce moving smoothly. Let's talk numbers for a second. The Umayyads' taxation system was as sophisticated as it was lucrative. They imposed a kharaj on agricultural produce, ensuring that the empire's fertile lands contributed their fair share. Then there was the jizya, a tax on non-Muslims that, while controversial, was a significant source of revenue. Critics often point to these taxes as oppressive, and sure, it wasn't a warm hug. But from a fiscal perspective, it was a masterstroke, allowing the Umayyads to finance their vast administrative and military apparatus. Now, let's not get swept away in the romance of bustling markets and golden coins. The truth is, the Umayyad economy, like any, had its ups and downs. Droughts, famines, and occasional rebellions could throw a wrench in the works. But the Umayyads were nothing if not adaptable. They knew how to roll with the punches, using diplomacy, strategic marriages, and sometimes brute force to keep the empire stable and the economy ticking over. In the grand scheme of things, the Umayyad economic engine was not just about accumulating wealth. It was about creating a legacy. Their ability to blend cultures and economies laid the groundwork for a golden age of learning and innovation that would echo through the ages. The Umayyads were like the original venture capitalists, investing in infrastructure and culture to ensure their empire didn't just survive, it thrived. But before we get too starry-eyed, let's debunk a myth or two. The Umayyads weren't benevolent rulers handing out prosperity like candy. Their regime was often criticized for corruption and extravagance. Some caliphs lived more like emperors than spiritual leaders, decked out in silks and indulging in the finest luxuries. Critics accused them of neglecting Islamic principles in favor of worldly pleasures. And let's face it, there was more than a grain of truth to these claims. The Umayyads were pragmatic, often prioritizing power and wealth over piety. And yet, for all their faults, the Umayyads left a mark on history that transcends their flaws. Their economic strategies and cultural achievements laid the foundation for future Islamic civilizations. They showed that an empire wasn't just about territory and troops. It was about innovation, trade, and the sharing of ideas. The Umayyads were the architects of a world where East met West, where commerce and culture intertwined to create something greater than the sum of its parts. So, as the Umayyad story unfolds, remember that it's not just a tale of conquest and power. It's a saga of economic ingenuity, cultural renaissance, and the relentless pursuit of prosperity. And as we delve deeper into their legacy, you'll see that the Umayyads weren't just rulers. They were visionaries who reshaped the world in ways that still resonate today. Stay tuned, because the story of the Umayyad Caliphate is far from over, and there's plenty more intrigue and innovation to come. So, as we dive back into the saga of the Umayyad Caliphate, let's peel back the layers of this glittering empire to reveal the cracks beneath its golden facade. You see, maintaining a sprawling empire is like juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle. One wrong move, and you're toast. And let's just say, the Umayyads were feeling the heat. First, let's talk about those luxurious excesses. The Umayyad rulers were known for living it up like rock stars with a penchant for opulence. Picture this: palaces dripping with gold, adorned with mosaics that could make a peacock jealous. These were places where the caliphs hosted extravagant feasts, complete with musicians and dancers, because why not turn every meal into a mini Woodstock? But while the caliphs were busy indulging in their lavish lifestyles, the common folk were starting to grumble. And let's face it, people don't take kindly to leaders who seem more interested in silk robes than sound governance. Now, here's where it gets juicy. The provinces, oh, those pesky provinces, were becoming increasingly restless. The further you got from the Umayyad capital in Damascus, the more the grip of the central government weakened. It's like trying to control a party from the other side of town. Good luck with that. The Berbers in North Africa, for instance, were not too thrilled about being treated as second-class citizens in their own backyard. They saw the Umayyad rulers as outsiders, more interested in extracting taxes than in fostering genuine unity. And who can blame them? It's hard to rally behind a leader who feels like a distant landlord rather than a local hero. Meanwhile, in Persia, the situation was even more complicated. The local populations there had a rich cultural history and a strong sense of identity. They weren't exactly lining up to embrace Arab rule with open arms. The Umayyads might have thought they could impose their culture and control, but the Persians were not about to let centuries of their own traditions get trampled underfoot. The seeds of dissent were sown, and they were starting to sprout like weeds in a neglected garden. And let's talk about overextension, every conqueror's Achilles heel. The Umayyads managed to stretch their empire from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indus River. That's a whopping 5,000 miles of territory, with more challenges than a reality TV show. Keeping such a vast empire in check required more than just military might. It needed a robust administration capable of addressing local needs. But here's the catch. The Umayyads didn't always have the right personnel in the right places. It's like trying to run a multinational corporation with a skeleton crew. Eventually, something's gotta give. Adding fuel to the fire, the Umayyads underestimated the power of local identities. They might have believed that a shared religion was enough to keep everyone singing from the same hymn sheet, but the reality was far more complex. Regional differences, language barriers, and cultural traditions were like tectonic plates, slowly grinding away beneath the surface until the inevitable earthquake hit. And what about those surprise parties I mentioned? Well, these were the rebellions that flared up like unexpected fireworks at a summer barbecue. The Kharijites, for instance, were a radical group that broke away from mainstream Islam and posed a constant threat with their fiery rhetoric and even fierier actions. They believed in a more egalitarian form of Islam and were not shy about expressing their discontent. Then there were the Shia Muslims, who had their own beef with the Umayyads, stemming from the earlier schisms in the Islamic community. They viewed the Umayyads as illegitimate rulers, usurpers who had taken power through might rather than right. As if internal tensions weren't enough, the Umayyads also faced external pressures that tested their resolve. The Byzantine Empire was always lurking at the edges, eager to reclaim lost territories. In 717 AD, the Byzantines launched a massive assault on Constantinople, hoping to turn the tide against the Umayyads. It was a bold move, and though the Umayyads managed to hold their ground, it was a stark reminder that their empire's borders were far from secure. So here we have an empire caught between the hammer of internal dissent and the anvil of external threats. It's a wonder they managed to hold it together for as long as they did. But like any good drama, the tension was building and cracks were starting to show. The Umayyad Caliphate was a glittering edifice, but beneath the surface, the foundation was starting to crumble. And there you have it. The Umayyads, a dynasty that soared to great heights, but was weighed down by its own excesses, internal divisions, and the relentless pressure of managing an empire that stretched too far for comfort. This was not just a story of conquest and expansion. It was a cautionary tale of ambition unchecked by pragmatism. As we wrap up this chapter, remember that the Umayyad Caliphate's story is far from over. The drama continues, with new characters waiting in the wings and the promise of even more twists and turns. So keep your eyes peeled, because the next part of this saga is just around the corner, and trust me, it's going to be a wild ride. So, as the stage is set for the final act of the Umayyad drama, let's rewind to the early 8th century, where the empire is a patchwork quilt of cultures and tensions, stitched together with a thread that's starting to fray. The Umayyads, once the poster children for Islamic expansion, are now dancing on the razor's edge of their own making. Enter the Abbasids, the dark horses in this saga, ready to flip the script. While the Umayyads were busy with their gilded palaces and constant firefighting on multiple fronts, the Abbasids were quietly amassing support. They were like that underdog team in a sports movie, unassuming but ready to hit their stride at just the right moment. The Abbasids cleverly tapped into the widespread discontent simmering across the empire. They promised a return to the principles of Islam, a stark contrast to the opulence and perceived corruption of the Umayyads. Their message was a breath of fresh air to many who felt stifled by Umayyad rule. By 747 AD, the Abbasids had gained enough traction to launch their revolution. It wasn't just a simple coup. It was a meticulously orchestrated uprising, the kind that makes you wonder if they had a modern-day PR team on speed dial. The Abbasids rallied support from diverse groups: the Shia Muslims, the disenchanted non-Arab converts known as Mawali, and even some Sunni Arabs who were fed up with the Umayyads' heavy-handed rule. This alliance formed a formidable force, one that the Umayyads, despite their military prowess, struggled to withstand. The turning point came at the Battle of the Zab in 750 AD. The Abbasid forces, led by Abu Muslim, a charismatic leader with a knack for strategy, clashed with the Umayyads in a showdown that was as much about ideology as it was about military might. The Abbasids, fueled by a potent mix of righteous indignation and tactical brilliance, crushed the Umayyad army. It was the kind of decisive victory that leaves no room for sequels. With the defeat at Zab, the Umayyad Caliphate crumbled faster than you can say regime change. The last Umayyad Caliph, Marwan Roman II, met his end fleeing to Egypt, marking the end of an era. But here's the kicker. While the Abbasids were busy celebrating their victory, one Umayyad prince, Abd al-Rahman, managed to escape the purge. He fled to Spain, where he established a new Umayyad emirate in Cordoba. Talk about a plot twist worthy of a Hollywood blockbuster. Now, let's dissect the elements that led to the Umayyads' downfall. Ironically, the very strategies that fueled their rise, military expansion, economic exploitation, and centralized power, also sowed the seeds of their demise. Their relentless pursuit of territory stretched their resources thin and left them vulnerable to internal dissent. The economic policies that once filled their coffers eventually alienated the diverse populations within their empire. And their centralization of power in Damascus meant that when the tide turned, the entire structure came crashing down. Yet, despite their dramatic fall, the Umayyads left an indelible mark on history. Their architectural innovations, from the stunning Umayyad Mosque in Damascus to the Great Mosque of Cordoba, are testaments to their grandeur and vision. These structures weren't just places of worship. They were symbols of the cultural synthesis that defined the Umayyad era. They blended Byzantine, Persian, and local influences into a unique architectural style that still captivates the imagination today. Culturally, the Umayyads were trailblazers. They championed the Arabic language, transforming it into the lingua franca of the Islamic world. This linguistic unity facilitated the exchange of ideas and knowledge, laying the groundwork for the Islamic Golden Age that would flourish under the Abbasids. The Umayyads also played a crucial role in preserving and expanding the knowledge of ancient civilizations. They translated and disseminated works from Greek, Persian, and Indian scholars, ensuring that this wealth of knowledge survived and thrived. But let's not gloss over the darker aspects of their rule. The Umayyads' emphasis on Arab supremacy and their heavy taxation policies created deep-seated resentment among non-Arab Muslims and other minorities. Their failure to address these grievances contributed to the widespread support for the Abbasid revolution. It's a classic case of history repeating itself. Those in power often blind to the cracks forming beneath their feet until it's too late. So, as we close the book on the Umayyad Caliphate, what can we take away from their story? Perhaps it's a reminder that empires, no matter how mighty, are ultimately built on the fragile foundation of human ambition and folly. They rise and fall with the tides of history, leaving behind legacies that are as much about their failures as their triumphs. The Umayyads, for all their flaws, were visionaries who dared to dream big. They transformed a fledgling Islamic state into a sprawling empire, navigating the complexities of power with a mix of savvy and swagger. Their story is a testament to the enduring human spirit, the drive to build, to conquer, and to leave a mark on the world. In the end, the Umayyad legacy is not just about the empires they built or the battles they fought. It's about the cultural bridges they forged, the knowledge they preserved, and the indelible imprint they left on the tapestry of history. And as we reflect on their story, we are reminded of the timeless dance between power and principle, ambition and restraint, a dance that continues to shape the world we live in today. In a world where social climbing usually involved a lot of bootlicking or a convenient marriage into a wealthy family, Oliver Cromwell's rise from the muddy fields of Huntingdon to the polished halls of power was like watching a sheepdog become the CEO of a tech startup. Born on April 25, 1599, Oliver started life as one of 10 kids in a family that was more comfortable country folk than posh aristocrats. His dad, Robert Cromwell, was a minor landowner, and his mom, Elizabeth Stewart, could trace her roots to royalty, but only if you squinted real hard and ignored a few generations. It was a background that whispered potential but screamed, keep your day job, which is exactly what Oliver did, at least for a while. Young Oliver's early education was typical of boys in his social class, which meant he was packed off to the local grammar school in Huntingdon. There, he learned the basics, a bit of Latin, some arithmetic, and enough Bible study to make him feel guilty about stealing apples from the neighbor's orchard. But the real game changer came when Oliver headed to Sydney Sussex College, Cambridge, in 1616. This wasn't exactly the Hogwarts of its day. Sydney Sussex was a new kid on the block, having only been founded in 1596. It was also known for its Puritan leanings, which must have been like catnip to Oliver, who would later become known for his rather stern religious views. Now, you might expect that a man destined to lead a nation through a civil war would have graduated with honors in something suitably grand like war strategy or political prowess. Instead, Oliver's academic career was cut short when his father died in 1617. With no diploma to hang on the wall, he returned home to manage the family estate. This was not the glamorous start of a future head of state, but rather a practical move to keep the family finances afloat. Talk about a buskill. Fast forward a few years, and we find Oliver married to Elizabeth Berkshire in 1620. This was a solid strategic move, not quite a fairy tale, but beneficial nonetheless. Elizabeth came from a well-to-do merchant family, which meant Oliver could upgrade his social circle from local gentry to people who actually had a bit of money. The couple had several children, which made for a bustling household and gave Oliver plenty of practice in leadership, albeit of a more domestic variety. As for his political career, Oliver's first foray was about as thrilling as watching paint dry. Was elected to Parliament for the Huntingdon seat in 1628, a position he held for a grand total of 1 year before King Charles. I decided he'd had enough of listening to the rabble and dissolved Parliament. Oliver returned to farming and local governance, which, let's be honest, were probably not the stuff of his dreams. At this point, he was still just another guy trying to make ends meet, juggling accounts and worrying about crop yields. Yet, there was something brewing beneath that plain exterior, something that would later come to define an era. Picture Oliver Cromwell not as the fearsome Lord Protector, but as a man wandering his fields, perhaps pondering the fate of England with the same intensity he applied to his sheep. He was a man not born into greatness, but who had greatness thrust upon him by a mix of circumstance, conviction, and the shoddy governance of King Charles I. There's a certain humor in the idea that Oliver's path to power began not with a coronation or a grand vision, but with a plough and a prayer. It's easy to romanticize the rise of such figures, imagining them as always destined for greatness, but the truth is often less glamorous. Cromwell's early life was marked by the same mundanities that fill the lives of many: family obligations, financial worries, and the relentless march of time. Yet, these experiences shaped him, grounded him, and perhaps even fueled the fire that would later burn so brightly in the English Civil War. Thus, the stage was set for a man who would later be known as England's protector. But back then, if you'd asked the locals about Oliver Cromwell, they might have shrugged and said, "Oh, you mean the farmer over at Huntingdon?" Little did they know, this farmer was about to trade his muddy boots for a much larger stage, and England would never be quite the same again. But as history would have it, Oliver Cromwell's boots were destined to trudge through more than just fields. By the time the 1640s rolled around, England was less a country and more a powder keg with a very short fuse. King Charles' knack for alienating just about everyone was like throwing a match into that keg, and soon the English Civil War was raging. For Cromwell, this was the moment when fate tapped him on the shoulder and whispered, "Suit up, it's game time." Now, entering a civil war is rarely on anyone's to-do list, but for Oliver, the call to arms was irresistible. The grievances against Charles I were as long as a Christmas shopping list, with religious tensions and royal overreach topping the bill. Cromwell, ever the devout Puritan, had a bone to pick with the king's flirtations with Catholicism. This wasn't about personal glory. It was about fighting for a cause that he believed was divinely sanctioned. If you're going to risk life and limb, it might as well be in the service of a higher power, or so the thinking went. In 1642, Cromwell joined the parliamentary forces, transforming from country squire to soldier. This wasn't an overnight metamorphosis. It was more of a crash course in military leadership. He started small, leading a troop of cavalry that would soon become his notorious Ironsides. Picture these guys as the original bad boys of the battlefield, disciplined, fearsome, and absolutely relentless. They weren't just gallivanting around on horseback for the fun of it. They were there to win, and win they did. The Ironsides were a gritty bunch, and Cromwell's insistence on merit over social standing was something of a revolution in itself. Forget aristocratic privilege. If you had the guts and the grit, you could rise through the ranks. This was a radical notion, in a time when your birth often dictated your battlefield clout. But Cromwell had no time for the old guard's nonsense. His focus was squarely on getting results, and his cavalry success was proof that his methods worked. Fast forward to 1644, and the Battle of Marston Moor was calling. On July 2nd, Cromwell and his Ironsides played a pivotal role in what would become one of the largest and most decisive battles of the English Civil War. Here's where the myth of Cromwell, the military genius, starts to take shape. His cavalry charge was the stuff of legend, sweeping in like an avenging wind and routing the royalist forces. But hold up, let's not get too carried away with the hero worship. Yes, Cromwell's tactics were effective, but the battle's success also hinged on factors as unpredictable as the English weather. A timely rainstorm muddied the ground, stalling the royalist advance and giving Parliament's forces the upper hand. So much for meticulous planning. Sometimes, Mother Nature is the best strategist. A year later, the Battle of Naseby would further cement Cromwell's reputation as a formidable military leader. On June 14, 1645, his forces faced off against King Charles's army, vastly outnumbering them with around 14,000 to the Royalists' 9,000. The odds were in his favor, sure, but Cromwell's tactical acumen helped seal the deal. His decision to target the Royalist infantry first, before turning on their cavalry, was a stroke of genius, or perhaps just common sense wrapped in a cloak of serendipity. Either way, it worked, and Charles's forces were decisively defeated, leading to the capture of the royal artillery and eventually the king himself. Talk about a game-changer. Yet, before we bestow the title of military genius upon Cromwell, let's remember that timing and a fair bit of luck played significant roles. The new model army, of which Cromwell's forces were a part, was the first professional army in England, and its success was due to collective effort as much as individual brilliance. Cromwell was undoubtedly a skilled leader, but he was also a man in the right place at the right time. Despite the myths of his military prowess, Cromwell's rise was as much about seizing opportunities as it was about any innate genius. His ability to read the battlefield, to adapt and improvise, was crucial, but so too were the broader social and political currents that swept him along. The English Civil War was a complex tapestry of personal ambition, religious fervor, and political upheaval, and Cromwell was just one thread in that intricate weave. As we peel back the layers of legend, we find a man who was pragmatic above all else. Cromwell's military career wasn't the result of some grand vision or exceptional foresight. It was often a matter of necessity, of responding to events as they unfolded. His success was as much about exploiting the chaos of the times as it was about any singular brilliance on his part. And perhaps that's the real story here. A man who navigated the turbulent waters of war with a mix of determination, adaptability, and a fair dose of luck. As the dust settled on the battlefields and the echoes of cannon fire faded into history, Cromwell's journey was far from over. The war might have been drawing to a close, but the real challenges were just beginning. England was on the brink of a new era, and Cromwell was about to find himself in the thick of it, not with a sword in hand, but with the weight of a nation on his shoulders. Stay tuned, because the saga of Oliver Cromwell is only just getting started. And so, with the battlefields of England settling into an uneasy silence, Oliver Cromwell found himself trading the chaos of war for the equally tumultuous world of politics. If you thought military command was a high-stakes game, just wait until you see how Cromwell navigates the labyrinthine corridors of power. Spoiler alert, it's about as orderly as a cat-herding convention. Let's kick things off with the Rump Parliament, which, despite its unappetizing name, was where the post-war action really heated up. In 1648, Parliament was a bit like a dysfunctional family reunion. Everyone had an agenda, and nobody could quite agree on what the main course should be. Charles I, ever the thorn in Parliament's side, was still in the picture, and his execution was the elephant in the room that everyone was trying to ignore. Cromwell, now a major political player, was all set to roll up his sleeves and tackle this mess head-on. But before we get to the nitty-gritty, let's set the scene. The Rump Parliament was a slimmed-down version of the Long Parliament, purged of anyone who might oppose the trial of the king. Call it an exclusive club, if you like, but with the stakes being a royal head, the atmosphere was anything but genteel. By January 1649, things had reached boiling point. Charles I was brought to trial, accused of being a tyrant, traitor, murderer, and public enemy. Not exactly the kind of titles you'd want on your LinkedIn profile. In a move that shocked Europe, Charles was found guilty and sentenced to death. Here's where the myth and reality start to diverge. While it's tempting to paint Cromwell as the unflinching architect of regicide, the truth is more nuanced. He was certainly a driving force, but the decision to execute the king was a collective one, born out of years of frustration and failed negotiations. Still, as Charles's head rolled on a chilly January day in 1649, Cromwell's fingerprints were all over the axe. With the king out of the picture, England was officially a monarchy-free zone. Enter the Commonwealth of England, with Cromwell at the helm of this shiny new republic. Now, if you're imagining a grand democratic experiment with freedom and equality for all, you might want to dial back the optimism. The reality was more like a political soap opera, complete with backstabbing, power struggles, and a good dose of hypocrisy. The Rump Parliament, theoretically in charge, was Cromwell's first hurdle. Despite their shared victory over the monarchy, Cromwell quickly grew frustrated with Parliament's inefficiency. It turns out that getting a group of politicians to agree on anything was as tough then as it is today. Cromwell's vision of a godly republic clashed with Parliament's more mundane concerns, like tax collection and trade regulation. The economy was a mess, with war debts piling up like overdue library books, and commerce was as sluggish as a dial-up internet connection. Cromwell wanted reform. Parliament wanted to maintain the status quo. Something had to give. In April 1653, Cromwell decided enough was enough. In a move that was audacious even by his standards, he marched into Parliament with a troop of soldiers and dissolved it. Picture the scene. Cromwell, in full righteous fury, declaring, "You have sat too long for any good you have been doing lately. In the name of God, go." It was the political equivalent of flipping the table at a family dinner. With Parliament out of the way, Cromwell assumed personal control, ushering in the era of the Protectorate. Now, let's pause to savor the irony. Cromwell, who had fought so passionately against royal tyranny, was now wielding a power that was more absolute than any king's. As Lord Protector, governed with a mix of military might and puritanical zeal. It was democracy in name only, with Cromwell's authority backed by his loyal new model army. Yet, despite his authoritarian streak, Cromwell was no tyrant. He genuinely believed he was acting in England's best interests, steering the nation towards a godly society. The Protectorate was a time of experimentation and reform. Cromwell introduced a written constitution, the instrument of government, which was groundbreaking in its attempt to balance power between the executive and legislative branches. But democracy was still a distant dream for most. Voting rights were limited, and the franchise was restricted to property owners. If you were hoping for a universal suffrage moment, keep dreaming. Cromwell's foreign policy was equally ambitious. He aimed to elevate England's status on the international stage, launching military campaigns in Ireland and Scotland to consolidate control. These campaigns were brutal, with Cromwell's forces employing scorched-earth tactics that left a legacy of resentment still felt today. His foreign exploits weren't just about conquest, they were also about trade. Cromwell understood that economic strength was key to national power, and he aggressively pursued trade opportunities, even engaging in a naval war with the Dutch to assert England's maritime supremacy. Yet, for all his successes, Cromwell's rule was fraught with challenges. Religious divisions persisted, and his attempts to create a unified Protestant nation often backfired. The Puritans, for all their moral rigor, were not universally popular, and Cromwell's attempts to impose their values on the nation met with resistance. His strict moral code, which included banning popular pastimes like theater and festive celebrations, didn't exactly win him any popularity contests. Cromwell's experiment in republicanism was a complex tapestry of ambition, idealism, and pragmatism. It was a republic, yes, but only just. The power dynamics were skewed, and while Cromwell envisioned a more equitable society, the reality was a far cry from the utopia he'd imagined. His reign was marked by contradictions. A leader who fought for liberty yet wielded power with an iron fist. A devout Puritan who embraced the pragmatism of realpolitik. By 1658, the weight of leadership was taking its toll on Cromwell. His health was failing, and with no clear successor, the future of the Protectorate was uncertain. It's easy to romanticize Cromwell as a visionary leader, but the truth is he was a man grappling with the enormity of the task before him, trying to steer a divided nation through uncharted waters. His legacy is a mixed bag, admired by some as a champion of liberty, reviled by others as a dictator in all but name. As we leave Cromwell at this juncture, it's clear his story is far from over. The Protectorate he built was as fragile as it was revolutionary, and the vacuum left by his death would plunge England back into political turmoil. But that's a tale for another time. For now, we can ponder the paradox of Oliver Cromwell, a man whose life was a testament to the complexity of power and the enduring struggle to balance ideals with reality. Stay tuned, because the echoes of his legacy are about to reverberate through the corridors of history once more. As the dust settled on the Protectorate, England was still grappling with the novel concept of a leader who didn't sport a crown. Oliver Cromwell, now Lord Protector, found himself navigating the murky waters of Republican governance with the enthusiasm of a cat in a swimming pool. He had traded the battlefield for the political arena, and let's just say the latter was hardly a smooth ride. Cromwell's Protectorate, 1653-1658, was an audacious experiment in governance. It's as if he'd peered into the future and decided to test drive a modern-day presidency centuries ahead of schedule. But while the title of Lord Protector sounded grand, it was more an exercise in juggling than ruling. The nation was a patchwork quilt of conflicting interests and old grudges, with Cromwell desperately trying to stitch it into something resembling order. One of the first orders of business was attempting to instill a bit of Puritan decorum into the rowdy English populace. Now, Puritans were the original killjoys when it came to entertainment. Imagine a society where Netflix and chill translates to read the Bible and ponder. Cromwell's regime famously cracked down on what they considered frivolous activities. Theaters, which had once been bustling hubs of creativity and lowbrow humor, were shuttered. It wasn't all Shakespearean drama, though. Bear baiting and cockfighting were also on the chopping block. For Cromwell, this wasn't just about being the fun police. It was about moral rectitude. Yet, as you might guess, this puritanical zeal didn't win any popularity contests. And then there was Christmas. Yes, Christmas, the season of goodwill, carols, and excessive pudding consumption. Cromwell and his Puritan pals decided that the holiday was too much of a pagan jamboree, leading to the infamous ban on Christmas celebrations. For a nation that loved its Yuletide cheer, this was akin to cancelling the Super Bowl. The ban wasn't just about quashing joy. It symbolized a deeper cultural clash between the old, festive traditions and the new, austere Puritan values. Unsurprisingly, this move didn't endear Cromwell to the public. Turns out, people take their Christmas quite seriously. While the domestic scene was a minefield of discontent, Cromwell's foreign policy was equally ambitious, if not downright aggressive. He had lofty goals of turning England into a major player on the world stage. His campaigns in Ireland and Scotland were both brutal and strategic. In Ireland, the conquest was as much about securing Protestant control as it was about expanding English influence. The notorious siege of Drogheda in 1649, where Cromwell's forces massacred thousands, remains a grim reminder of the costs of war and ideology. Scotland, too, felt the weight of Cromwell's military might. The Scots had the audacity to support Charles Roman II, son of the executed Charles I, as their king. Cromwell, never one to tolerate such royalist sympathies, marched north with his new model army. The Battle of Dunbar in 1650 saw Cromwell's forces decisively defeat the Scots, securing his hold over the region. It was a classic case of military prowess, but also a testament to Cromwell's determination to assert control over the British Isles. Yet, for all his military successes, Cromwell's foreign policy was not just about conquest. He had an eye on trade and economic expansion, understanding that a prosperous England required more than just military victories. His pursuit of maritime dominance led to the Anglo-Dutch Wars, a series of conflicts with the Netherlands over trade routes and naval supremacy. The wars were costly, both in terms of finances and human lives, but they underscored Cromwell's vision of an England that could hold its own in the cutthroat world of international commerce. Economically, Cromwell's England was far from a utopia. The country was saddled with war debts, and the economy was as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Taxation was a constant source of tension, with Cromwell's government introducing various levies to fund military campaigns and governance. The infamous decimation tax targeted royalist sympathizers, requiring them to pay a hefty portion of their income. It was a clever way to punish the opposition while filling the coffers, but it also bred resentment and further divided an already fractured society. Despite the challenges, Cromwell's legacy is not without its merits. He introduced the instrument of government in 1653, the first written constitution in England's history. It aimed to balance power between the Protector and Parliament, a groundbreaking idea that echoed through the centuries. While it was far from perfect, it laid the groundwork for future constitutional developments. Cromwell's rule was marked by contradictions. He was a man driven by fervent religious conviction, yet pragmatic enough to engage in realpolitik. His vision for a godly society often clashed with the reality of governing a diverse and divided nation. He wielded power with an iron fist, but always under the guise of serving the greater good. His protectorate was a balancing act between authoritarian rule and republican ideals, a tightrope he walked with varying degrees of success. As we leave the era of Cromwell as Lord Protector, it's clear that his story is one of ambition, controversy, and complexity. He was a leader who defied easy categorization, a figure who left an indelible mark on English history. Yet, like all historical figures, he was a product of his time, grappling with the challenges and contradictions of his era. The Protectorate was both a culmination of his vision and a testament to the limits of power. And as Cromwell's health waned in 1658, the question of succession loomed large, setting the stage for yet another chapter in England's tumultuous political saga. Stay tuned, because the tale of Oliver Cromwell and the nation he sought to reshape is far from over. As Oliver Cromwell's health took a nosedive in 1658, the protectorate he labored so fiercely to establish began to wobble like a precariously stacked Jenga tower. Picture it. a nation that had ditched its king only to find itself ruled by a man who ostensibly wanted to avoid the whole king thing, but ended up with a crown of thorns in the form of the Lord Protector's hat. With the physical decline of its architect, the grand experiment of republican governance teetered on the brink of collapse, and the spectre of a power vacuum loomed ominously over England. On September 3, 1658, Cromwell succumbed to a bout of malaria combined with a kidney infection, leaving the nation in a state of political limbo. His death date, coincidentally, marked the anniversary of his victories at the battles of Dunbar and Worcester. Talk about timing. Or perhaps it was just a cosmic wink at his military prowess. With his passing, the question of succession became as tangled as a bowl of spaghetti. Cromwell had nominated his son Richard as his successor, but let's just say Richard's leadership skills were more country squire than ruthless commander. Richard Cromwell, affectionately, or not, nicknamed Tumbledown Dick, tried to fill his father's rather large boots, but resembled a deer caught in the dazzling headlights of political chaos. With no military background and a penchant for avoiding confrontation, Richard was as suited to leading a nation as a cat is to babysitting. His brief stint as Lord Protector lasted a mere 9 months, from September 1658 to May 1659, before he was politely shown the door by a restless Parliament that had grown weary of his indecisive leadership. Richard's departure marked the beginning of the end for the Protectorate. The delicate balance that Oliver had maintained was quickly unraveling. With the Protectorate dissolving faster than a sugar cube in hot tea, the power vacuum gave rise to a period of political instability known as the Second Commonwealth. Think of it as England's awkward teenage years, full of identity crises and rebellious factions. The Rump Parliament, which had been dismissed by Oliver in a fit of righteous fury, was recalled in 1659, but the lack of strong leadership led to a chaotic game of musical chairs among various political groups. The army, sensing an opportunity, flexed its muscles, and figures like General George Monk began to emerge as key players in the unfolding drama. By early 1660, it was clear that the political experiment born out of the English civil wars had run its course, and a return to monarchy seemed inevitable. Enter Charles Roman II, son of the beheaded Charles I, who had been cooling his heels in exile, and was now poised for a royal comeback. General Monk, playing the role of kingmaker, marched his troops to London in February 1660 and facilitated the restoration of the monarchy. It was a shrewd move, reminiscent of a chess master checkmating his opponent with a decisive flourish. On May 29, 1660, Charles Roman II entered London to jubilant crowds, marking the official end of the Commonwealth and the beginning of the Restoration period. England was once again under the rule of a Stuart king, and the nation, weary of political upheaval, welcomed the stability that a monarchy promised, at least for a while. The Restoration brought back more than just a monarch. It revived traditions, institutions, and most importantly for some, a Christmas celebration free from the Puritan ban. So, what do we make of Oliver Cromwell's legacy? Was he a visionary determined to forge a new path for England, or merely another power-hungry leader dressed in the garb of a righteous reformer? The truth, as with most historical figures, lies somewhere in between. Cromwell was undeniably a man of conviction, propelled by his Puritan faith and a deep-seated belief in divine providence. Yet, his tenure as Lord Protector was marked by contradictions. He abolished the monarchy, but ruled with an authority that echoed the very institution he dismantled, fought for liberty, but imposed his own brand of moral rigidity on a nation that wasn't quite ready to swap revelry for piety. Cromwell's legacy is a complex tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, idealism, and pragmatism. He was a military genius, yes, but his political skills were less polished, marred by an inability to reconcile his vision of a godly republic with the messy reality of governance. His rule was a paradox, authoritarian yet reformist, puritanical yet pragmatic. He left England forever changed, a nation that had tasted republicanism and found it both liberating and confining. In the grand scheme of history, Cromwell is a figure both vilified and romanticized. To some, he is a hero who stood against tyranny. To others, a dictator who suppressed dissent. His story serves as a reminder of the elusiveness of utopia and the perils of idealism untempered by practical governance. Modern leaders could take a page from Cromwell's book, though perhaps not the one on banning Christmas. The lesson here is about balancing vision with reality, ideals with the practicalities of leadership. Power, as Cromwell's life illustrates, is a double-edged sword, capable of cutting both ways. As the echoes of Cromwell's legacy fade into the annals of history, we are left with a portrait of a man who tried to reshape England in his image, a task as daunting as it was transformative. His era was a crucible of change, a time when the old order was challenged and new possibilities emerged. Though the Protectorate may have crumbled, the questions it raised about governance, power, and the nature of leadership continue to resonate. So next time you ponder the annals of history, spare a thought for Oliver Cromwell, a farmer turned general, a revolutionary turned ruler, a man whose life was as tumultuous and compelling as the age in which he lived. Nikola Tesla, the man who electrified the world, or at least tried to without tripping over his own shoelaces in the process, was born in 1856 in Smiljan, a small village in what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His birth was practically a cue for lightning to strike, and not just metaphorically. Legend has it, a violent storm raged the night Tesla made his grand entrance, prompting a midwife to declare he was a child of the storm. Turns out, Tesla would spend the rest of his life sparking all sorts of electrical storms, real and metaphorical. Tesla's early years were spent in a family that valued books more than bread. His father was a priest and a writer, his mother an inventor of household appliances before it was cool. Forget the iPad kids of today. Young Nikola was memorizing entire books and solving calculus problems in his head, while most of us were trying not to eat glue. If only they had school science fairs back then, Tesla would have swept them all. By 1884, Tesla found himself on a transatlantic journey to America, clutching a letter of introduction to none other than Thomas Edison. The letter, from a mutual acquaintance, described Tesla as a man who has many ideas. That might be the understatement of the century. Tesla had more ideas than Edison had patents, and Edison had a lot of patents, over 1,000 in fact. Tesla arrived in New York with just 4 cents in his pocket and a mind brimming with revolutionary concepts. He quickly landed a job with Edison, who at the time was the reigning king of electricity in America. Now, Edison was a DC, direct current, kind of guy, and he was convinced that his system was the future. Tesla, however, was all about AC, alternating current, which he saw as more efficient and capable of transmitting electricity over longer distances. It was like the tech version of the Beatles' VS, the Rolling Stones, except with more volts. Their professional relationship was about as smooth as a square wheel. Edison promised Tesla $50,000, around $1, $4 million today, to improve his DC generators. Tesla, ever the overachiever, did just that. But when he asked for the money, Edison laughed and said, "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor." Lesson learned. Always get your contracts in writing, especially when dealing with the Wizard of Menlo Park. The Tesla-Edison rivalry became the stuff of legend. Edison embarked on a smear campaign against AC, claiming it was dangerous. He even went so far as to publicly electrocute animals to prove his point. Meanwhile, Tesla was busy lighting up the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago with his AC system, dazzling the world and showcasing the future. AC won the war, but not without a few casualties along the way, including a few unfortunate dogs, cats, and a horse. Tesla was a man of bizarre habits and quirks, which only added to his enigmatic persona. He was famously obsessed with the number 3, washing his hands compulsively, and had a peculiar fondness for pigeons. But one of his more ambitious quirks was his attempt to harness the power of the catnap. Tesla believed he could get by on just 2 hours of sleep a day, broken into micro-naps. This might sound like a great idea if you're a caffeine-fueled college student during finals week, but for Tesla, it was more like a sleep-deprived disaster. In reality, Tesla's sleep experiments often ended with him finding himself in strange places, having wandered off in a half-dazed state. It's a wonder he didn't sleepwalk right into one of Edison's DC generators. But Tesla's boundless energy and relentless pursuit of his ideas kept him going, even if his sleep schedule was a bit of a train wreck. Despite the rivalry and eccentricities, Tesla's work laid the foundation for much of the electrical world we know today. Sure, the Tesla-Edison saga makes for good drama, but let's not forget the real feat here. Tesla's AC system is what powers our modern world. The lights we flip on, the smartphones we charge, all those electrical conveniences we can't live without. It's Tesla's genius humming in the background. So, while Edison might have been the savvy businessman and showman, Tesla was the visionary, the dreamer who dared to imagine a world electrified. Perhaps he was a bit too far ahead of his time, a bit too unconventional for the tastes of his era. But then again, aren't all geniuses a little bit mad? Tesla certainly was, and thank the stars for that. His peculiar mix of brilliance and eccentricity sparked a world of innovation, one sleep-deprived experiment at a time. Tesla's peculiar mix of brilliance and eccentricity sparked a world of innovation, one sleep-deprived experiment at a time. And boy, did the 1890 have Tesla's fingerprints all over them. If the previous decade was a warm-up, the 90s were his electric concerto, filled with enough invention to make a patent office clerk's head spin. Let's start with the Tesla coil, a device so iconic it practically deserves its own rock band. Patented in 1891, the Tesla coil was the cornerstone of Tesla's wireless transmission dreams. Imagine a giant metal contraption that zaps out electrical arcs like a high-voltage light show, making it the perfect party trick for the scientifically inclined. But the Tesla coil was more than just a sparkly toy. It was Tesla's ticket to the future. He envisioned a world where electricity could be sent wirelessly across long distances, leapfrogging the need for cumbersome wires. Who needed spaghetti bowls of cables when you could just zap power through the air? Of course, Tesla's vision was a bit too ahead of its time. The technology to transmit power wirelessly on a large scale was like trying to stream Netflix on dial-up. The idea was there, but the infrastructure wasn't. Yet, the coil wasn't just a showpiece. It became a foundational tool in radio technology and even medical devices. Tesla's ability to see beyond the immediate use of his inventions is precisely what made him the Steve Jobs of his era, minus the turtleneck and keynote speeches. Meanwhile, the war of currents was still sizzling like a dodgy extension cord. Edison, ever the public relations maestro, wasn't above a bit of theatrical villainy. To convince the public that Tesla's AC, alternating current, was a one-way ticket to electrocutionville, Edison orchestrated grisly demonstrations. Yes, folks, we're talking about the infamous public electrocutions of animals. Edison fried everything from dogs and cats to, most notoriously, Topsy the elephant, all in a bid to convince people that AC was the electrical equivalent of the Grim Reaper. It was a PR stunt that would make today's spin doctors blush, but it didn't quite have the desired effect. In the end, AC emerged victorious, and the Niagara Falls Power Project went live in 1896, harnessing the kinetic energy of rushing water to power Buffalo, New York. It was like a giant neon sign flashing. Tesla was right. This was the first major power station to use AC, and it signaled the dawn of a new electrical era. For the first time, electricity wasn't just a novelty for the rich, but a burgeoning public utility. While the war of currents had him entangled in a power struggle of epic proportions, Tesla's personal quirks were also running on full charge. Take, for instance, his fondness for pigeons. Most of us, pigeons are just urban rats with wings, but to Tesla, they were feathery muses. He would often feed them in Bryant Park, forming a peculiar bond with these birds. Legend has it he even claimed to have loved a particular white pigeon like a man loves a woman. In an era where people were still trying to figure out how to get indoor plumbing right, Tesla was out there having deep emotional connections with pigeons. And let's not forget his aversion to pearls. Yes, you heard that right. Tesla couldn't stand the sight of pearls, to the point where he would refuse to speak to women wearing them. If you wanted to win over Tesla, you'd better leave the oyster jewelry at home. Yet, despite these eccentricities, or perhaps because of them, Tesla's mind was a cauldron of ideas bubbling over. His wireless lighting systems were another testament to his forward-thinking genius. In his Manhattan laboratory, Tesla experimented with phosphorescent bulbs, lighting them up without a single wire in sight. These demonstrations were like magic shows, with Tesla as the grand illusionist, conjuring light out of thin air. Today's wireless charging devices are direct descendants of these early experiments, a testament to how Tesla's ideas have quietly infiltrated our tech-centric lives. Tesla's life, in the 1890, was a whirlwind of invention and intrigue, a time when his visions danced tantalizingly close to reality. His ideas were often as grand as they were impractical, the kind that made investors both excited and a little bit nervous. After all, how do you put a price tag on dreams of world-changing proportions? Yet, for all of Tesla's quirks and the occasional misstep, his legacy is one of audacious imagination and relentless pursuit of a better future. The 1890 may have been the peak of his inventive prowess, but they were just the beginning of a legacy that would continue to pulse through the veins of modern technology. So, as we leave Tesla in the throes of his most prolific decade, it's clear that the world would never be quite the same. He was a man who danced on the edge of madness and genius, forever chasing the electric possibilities of tomorrow. And if that meant feeding pigeons and dodging pearls along the way, then so be it. Tesla was, after all, one of a kind, a true original in a world that often struggled to keep up with his electrifying pace. Tesla's story takes a nosedive into financial chaos, a bit like watching a high-wire act where the acrobat suddenly remembers they're afraid of heights. Enter the Wardenclyffe Tower, Tesla's grandest dream and arguably his most spectacular failure. This was his shot at wireless global communication, a plan so audacious that it seemed to leap out of a sci-fi novel. Picture a 187-foot-tall tower on Long Island with a concrete foundation sinking 120 feet into the earth, crowned by a 68-foot copper dome. It was supposed to be the backbone of a global network capable of beaming messages, images, and even electricity across continents without a single wire. Take that, Edison. But here's the kicker. Tesla was pitching this vision in the early 1900s, a time when most folks were still grappling with the novelty of indoor plumbing. Wireless communication sounded about as believable as teleportation does today. Sure, the idea was thrilling, but Tesla needed cold, hard cash to make it happen. And that's where his troubles began. Enter J.P. Morgan, the financial titan with a wallet as thick as his mustache. Tesla convinced Morgan to bankroll the Wardenclyffe project, securing an initial investment of $150,000, around $4.5 million today. The pitch: a world interconnected by Tesla's technology, promising to revolutionize communication and power distribution. Morgan was intrigued, probably thinking he was buying a first-class ticket to the future. However, Tesla had a penchant for painting his dreams in the most grandiose colors possible. His over-the-top promises could charm the shoes off a centipede, but they often left investors with empty pockets and a bad case of buyer's remorse. As construction of the tower drained funds faster than you can say financial ruin, Tesla's promises began to unravel. He had envisioned a world where his tower would transmit not just information, but energy itself. Imagine a global wireless power grid. Yet, without the requisite technology to back it up, those promises turned into pipe dreams. By 1906, Morgan pulled the plug. The realization hit that Tesla's vision was still decades ahead of its time, a fact that didn't exactly help when the bills came due. The Wardenclyffe Tower, once a beacon of utopian promise, now stood as a monument to Tesla's financial overreach. It's like building a spaceship without knowing how to get it off the ground. Tesla's financial struggles weren't just limited to his ambitious projects. As the cash flow dried up, he found himself living in increasingly modest accommodations. Gone were the days of luxury suites. Tesla took to residing in some of New York's cheapest hotels. Imagine a man lauded for his intellect, reduced to living on credit, barely able to pay his bills. It's a harsh reminder that even geniuses need to eat, and preferably something more than humble pie. Despite these setbacks, Tesla never stopped dreaming. He continued to woo investors with his visionary ideas, each one more ambitious than the last. But the economic reality of the time was less than forgiving. The early 20th century was a period of rapid industrialization, marked by fierce competition and financial volatility. Investors wanted reliable returns, not speculative leaps into the technological unknown. Tesla's tendency to promise the moon and deliver a handful of stardust often left him scrambling. He'd cut costs by living frugally, yet his dreams remained as extravagant as ever. It was a classic case of champagne visions on a beer budget. His relentless optimism was both his greatest strength and his Achilles heel. The contrast between Tesla's utopian visions and the economic realities of his era couldn't have been starker. While he imagined a world transformed by wireless technology, the world was grappling with the practicalities of the industrial age: railroads, factories, and mechanized production. Tesla was a man out of sync with his time, an innovator thinking in gigawatts while the world was still measuring in kilowatts. And yet, there was something undeniably romantic about Tesla's tenacity. His willingness to pursue his dreams, even in the face of financial disaster, speaks to a kind of idealism rarely seen. It's easy to dismiss him as a dreamer, but it's harder to ignore the fact that many of his impossible ideas have since become reality. Wireless communication, check. Wireless power transfer, check. Tesla's visions were seeds planted in the fertile soil of future innovation. So, while his financial ventures often ended in ruin, Tesla's legacy was never about money. It was about pushing the boundaries of what was possible, daring to imagine a world where technology improved human life in unimaginable ways. Even as the Wardenclyffe Tower crumbled, Tesla's ideas endured, whispering possibilities to future generations. In the end, Tesla's financial woes were less a testament to his failure and more a reflection of a world not yet ready for his brilliance. He was a man ahead of his time, a visionary caught in the gears of an industrial machine that valued practicality over possibility. And though he might have been financially bankrupt, his intellectual wealth was boundless, laying the groundwork for the technological marvels we enjoy today. As we leave Tesla amidst his triumphs and tribulations, it's clear his story is far from over. Tesla's saga of ambition and adversity continues to inspire, a reminder that the path to innovation is often paved with setbacks. So, as we pause in this chapter of Tesla's electrifying life, let's keep our eyes on the horizon, for the sparks of his genius are far from extinguished. As we hover over the threshold of Tesla's twilight years, the air is thick with both genius and eccentricity, like the scent of burnt toast. Can't quite decide if it's delightful or worrying. By this point, Tesla was less the darling of invention and more the enigmatic figure muttering about cosmic rays in the corner of the room. His reputation had started to drift from the man who electrified the world to the eccentric recluse who, quite literally, saw signals from Mars. Now, let's talk about Tesla's obsession with numerology, specifically his fixation on the number 3. To Tesla, this wasn't just a number, it was the universe's cheat code. He believed that the numbers 3, 6, and 9 were the keys to unlocking the secrets of the cosmos. So committed was he to this belief that he would circle a building 3 times before entering, just in case the universe was taking notes. If you think that's quirky, consider this. He also insisted on having 18 napkins on his table, because 18 is divisible by 3, naturally. This numerical obsession, while charmingly odd, is emblematic of Tesla's broader search for the hidden patterns and harmonies in nature. In a world obsessed with the tangibles of coal and steel, Tesla was on a quest for the cosmic blueprint. He was convinced that energy, frequency, and vibration held the secrets to the universe. It's the kind of belief that would make a modern physicist nod appreciatively, then slowly back away. But Tesla's peculiarities didn't stop at numbers. Oh no, he also dabbled in the interstellar. He became convinced that he was receiving signals from another planet, Mars, to be precise. In 1899, while fiddling with his radio receiver at a Colorado Springs lab, Tesla claimed to have intercepted a series of beeps and blips that he believed were extraterrestrial communications. The scientific community of the time was, shall we say, skeptical. Imagine pitching that to your boss today. Sorry, I'm late. I was decoding Martian radio waves. This belief in alien communication, while dismissed by most of his contemporaries, added a layer of mystique to Tesla's persona. It was a time when the idea of life beyond Earth was as alien as, well, aliens. Yet here was Tesla, decades ahead of his time, pondering the cosmic neighborhood. Whether he actually intercepted Martian chatter or simply picked up static from a star, the allure of it captured imaginations. It was a tantalizing glimpse of the what-ifs that science fiction would later feast upon. Now, let's dive into the myth of Tesla's death ray, a legend as enduring as it is dramatic. In the 1930, Tesla announced that he had developed a particle beam weapon capable of ending warfare by destroying armies and aircraft from miles away. He dubbed it Teleforce, but the press, with their flair for the dramatic, called it a death ray. Imagine the headlines. Eccentric inventor claims to have built ultimate peacekeeper, the death ray. It was a headline that sold papers and ignited both fear and fascination in equal measure. Tesla's claims about the death ray were grandiose, as usual. He envisioned it as a defensive weapon, a means to make warfare obsolete by making it impassable. The details were murky, shrouded in Tesla's typical mix of technical jargon and visionary promises. He claimed it could target objects up to 250 miles away, using a high-energy beam of particles accelerated by electromagnetic forces. But here's the kicker. Tesla never actually built a working model. The death ray remained a tantalizing promise, a specter of powerful potential with no physical form. Despite this, the myth thrived. In an era of burgeoning military technology, the concept of a death ray was both terrifying and alluring. Governments around the world perked up at the idea, though it remained firmly in the realm of speculative fiction. The death ray was Tesla at his most mythic, bold, visionary, and perhaps a bit too far into the realm of imagination. Tesla's interactions with the media during these later years became increasingly strained. The press, once captivated by his genius, now found him a source of sensational stories. Tesla, who had once dazzled reporters with his demonstrations, found himself portrayed as the eccentric old man with grandiose claims and dwindling credibility. His penchant for hyperbole didn't help. He was a man who promised the moon when the world was still figuring out how to reach the nearest hilltop. Yet, for all the skepticism, Tesla remained a figure of fascination. He was a living legend, a man whose name evoked both admiration and bemusement. The media's portrayal of Tesla as a mad scientist belied the profound truths behind many of his ideas. While he might not have built a death ray, his work in wireless technology and electrical engineering laid the groundwork for future innovations. In the end, Tesla was a paradox, both visionary and eccentric, revered and ridiculed. His later years were marked by a sense of isolation, a man out of sync with the world around him. Yet, even as his reputation took on the patina of eccentricity, his contributions to science and technology remained undeniable. Tesla was, and continues to be, a symbol of the audacious pursuit of knowledge, a reminder that the path to understanding is as much about daring to dream as it is about the hard realities of the here and now. As we pause here in the tale of Tesla's later years, we find a man still reaching for the stars, even as his feet shuffled along the dusty paths of Earth. His story is far from over, and the echoes of his genius continue to resonate, inviting us to ponder the possibilities of tomorrow. So, stay tuned, because the sparks of Tesla's remarkable journey are far from extinguished, and there's still a chapter left in this electrifying saga. And so, as we draw the curtains on the late years of Nikola Tesla, we find ourselves peering into the legacy of a man who, despite the eccentricities and unfulfilled promises, left an indelible mark on the tapestry of modern technology. Tesla's imaginative blueprint for a world interconnected by wireless energy and communication, once relegated to the fringes of scientific possibility, has since blossomed into the very fabric of our digital age. The man who once seemed to be speaking in tongues to a world not ready to listen has, in a twist of cosmic irony, become the patron saint of innovation itself. Tesla's ideas, dismissed as outlandish in his own lifetime, have been vindicated in the most spectacular fashion. Consider wireless technology. Tesla envisioned a network of power and communication that could travel invisibly through the air, a concept that now underpins everything from the smartphones in our pockets to the Wi-Fi signals that make our Netflix binges possible. Tesla's dream was a world where wires were as obsolete as the telegraph, a vision that, while it took decades to materialize, is now a cornerstone of our interconnected existence. And then there's the resurgence of interest in Tesla's work in the late 20th century. As the century waned and technology picked up its relentless pace, Tesla's contributions were re-evaluated, and his genius was finally acknowledged by a new generation. In the 1980s and 90s, a wave of Tesla-mania swept through pop culture, fueled in part by the growing fascination with alternative energy sources and the allure of the misunderstood genius. Suddenly, Tesla was everywhere, from books and documentaries to rock bands and video games. He became the archetype of the brilliant inventor, the unsung hero whose ideas were light years ahead of their time. Tesla's posthumous rise to pop culture icon status is a fascinating study in how society lionizes figures who were once marginalized. It's the ultimate underdog story, the inventor who died penniless and alone, yet whose name now graces electric cars and scientific awards. Tesla's life, filled with the tension between genius and madness, became a narrative ripe for mythologizing. The romantic notion of the tortured genius, misunderstood and unappreciated in his time, struck a chord with a culture increasingly obsessed with innovation and the idea of the lone visionary. Yet, it's essential to temper this romanticism with a dose of reality. Tesla's life was not a fairy tale. It was a complex tapestry woven with both triumphs and failures. For every successful innovation, there were grandiose ideas that never left the drawing board. The myth of Tesla as an infallible genius belies the truth of his human vulnerabilities, his financial missteps, his inability to navigate the cutthroat world of business, and his penchant for overpromising. Tesla's story is a poignant reminder of the delicate balance between genius and madness. His eccentricities, whether it was his fixation on pigeons or his belief in Martian signals, were as much a part of his identity as his groundbreaking inventions. These quirks, while often the subject of ridicule, were intrinsic to his creative process. In a world that sought to box him into the conventional, Tesla danced on the edge, always pushing the boundaries of what was possible. His legacy is also a testament to the power of perseverance. Despite the financial woes and the skepticism of his contemporaries, Tesla never stopped dreaming. He remained a relentless optimist, always looking to the horizon with visions of a better future. This tenacity, this unwillingness to accept the status quo, is perhaps his most enduring contribution. In an era where the practical often overshadowed the visionary, Tesla dared to dream big. As we reflect on Tesla's life, it's clear that his story is as much about human nature as it is about technological progress. It's a tale of ambition, failure, redemption, and impact, an exploration of how society values and sometimes overlooks those who dare to think differently. Tesla's legacy serves as a beacon for future innovators, a reminder that true genius often dances hand in hand with madness. In conclusion, Tesla's life was a whirlwind of brilliance and eccentricity, a series of bold dreams that pushed the boundaries of what humanity thought possible. His legacy is a complex one, filled with both the romance of the visionary and the harsh realities of a world not yet ready for his ideas. Today, as we power our lives with the technologies he envisioned, we honor the man who dreamed of electrifying the world. Tesla's genius was a spark that ignited a century of innovation, and his legacy continues to inspire those who dare to dream beyond the limits of the known world.